In at 5 minutes. Commissioner Reardon has given some testimony today. Most of you know he works in the food safety business at the national level, so he's got some things I want to talk to him about. Commissioner Weiss notified me this morning that she's not feeling well, so she will not be here today. And again, Commissioner Ellison, but looking around council, I believe we have a quorum. Okay, very good. So in the call to order, let me read the conflict of interest statement. North Carolina General Statute 138A-15 mandates at the beginning of any meeting of a board, the chair shall remind all members of their duty to avoid conflicts of interest under this subchapter. The chair shall also inquire as to whether there is any known conflict of interest with respect to any matters coming before the board at that time. Do we have any conflicts based on the agenda? Okay, and I have no modifications or adjustments to the agenda. Hearing none, we will proceed. In my preliminary matters, I want to say, I looked down at Bill Yarborough's, where he sits today, and I am reminded Commissioner Weiss used to sit there. Commissioner Wisnett, Richard Wisnett, you guys know Richard, he sat there. Commissioner Vanderbart sat there. And Commissioner Solomon sat there. But the one I still look for is Commissioner Tedder. Because Tedder always wanted to sit on that end seat, and he did. And he knew how to play it to the circle and knew how to play it to the audience. And every once in a while, I still look down there and expect Tedder to say something. But as most of you know, Steve passed away a couple weeks ago. I knew he had a series. As most of you know, he gave his life to this business. He was one of the best guys and one of the true unique characters in the business too, I think, if you look at the top tier of people. Two things he'd rather probably be was on his farm with his dogs and his wife and daughter, or here in the arena. And if you knew Steve, he was always prepared. He always had an opinion. At times he could be a little prickly because he was really passionate about what he believed in if you're on the other side. And I always dreaded when I was on the other side of an issue with him. It wasn't often, but he was a hard arguer, but he was a good mentor to me. And I'll talk about that later. But I did want to reflect a little bit on Steve and remind everybody he spent his career at DWQ. What was DWQ? I think it was 32 years. I didn't write it down, maybe 30. I think it's 32. While he was here, he was water quality section chief. He was environmental laboratory director, and even at one point served as a liaison between Region 4 and the US EPA. He won several awards, including the Governor's Award for Excellent, North Carolina Governor's Award for Excellent. He won the Order of the Longleaf Pine. He won the EPA Award for Excellence, and he won the DWQ Vanguard Award. A lot more that he was named and mentioned and won, but those were the big ones that I just picked out. After the career here, he served 14 years as a consultant. And of course, he was a meaningful member of this commission for several terms. When I joined, he was water quality chair, and he really spent a lot of time with me, mentoring me. We knew each other, but he always reminded me, and I think liked me, because even if we agreed or disagreed, it wasn't just reading the material, it was studying it. And he said, you really study it, you know the page numbers. And Steve was always ready, and that was one of the things he really liked about fellow commissioners, the ones that had studied the material. So at this point, I just want to have a moment of silence for Steve Tedder and his contributions to this business and this EMC. Let's take a minute. Okay, thank you. Any other comments from around the horseshoe on Steve? I think that was Commissioner Carter.
Yeah, I'll just quickly mention, well, first of all, I knew he had a serious illness. I did not know it was that serious. So thank you for at least letting us know this morning. The one most recent thing is every Christmas I'd get a electronic Christmas card from him, from the Tedder farm. And I just enjoyed getting it every year. And I'm sorry, I won't be continuing.
Commissioner Yarborough.
I knew him well, and as you said, well, sometimes you had disagreements with him, but you knew where he stood. I dealt with him a lot with the trout situation and some of the other issues of the western part of the state. I had great respect for him. And, I'm sad to hear that his passing.
Okay, Commissioner Deerhake.
I've known him for many years also, and He was always very kind to me, and I guess the last time we worked together was this most recent Salisbury request, and he was not well, but he drove all the way to Raleigh, wanted to talk with us about it. So we appreciated his effort till the very end.
To the very end. Okay. All right. With that said, and done, those wrap up preliminary matters. We have two sets of draft minutes on the table. One is from November 14th. Let's review these separately and make motions separately. But for the November 14th, 2024 minutes, do we have any comments or corrections for those? Okay, hearing none, do we have a motion to approve the November 14th, 2024 minutes? A motion, Commissioner Yarborough, Commissioner Baumgartner seconds. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? It looks unanimous. It's unanimous. All right, same thing on the January 9th meetings, our last meeting. Any comments, discussion, corrections on those? Okay, hearing none, do we have a motion? Commissioner Tweedy, he raised his hand. Do we have a second? Commissioner Duggan, Vice Chair, seconds. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It's unanimous. Very good. Again, I want to thank Lois for all her hard work on those minutes and the folks that support her with that. And also the Vice Chair for his hard work. It takes time and effort, but we have a recording, but it's very important to have a written record of the highlights of those meetings. So thank you very much, Chris. It's a job, isn't it? Well, okay. We appreciate it. And I don't want to leave council out because I know she looks at some of them sometimes too. So thank you, Ellie, for what you do there too. Okay. Now we're ready to move to action items. Action item 1, 25-12, request for approval of hearing officer's report and final approval of regulatory impact analysis for rule amendments to permit review timelines and definitions pursuant to Session Law 23-134 as amended by Senate Law 24-1, Section 4.13. And we have Ms. Quinlan in front of us. So thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Solomon. Morning, Commissioners. I'm Catherine Quinlan with the Rural Development Branch of the Division of Air Quality, and I'll be presenting the hearing officer's report for these rule revisions to 9 rules in subchapter 2Q. So just a list of acronyms to reference throughout the slides. And I'll just recap briefly the background behind this. So the legislature passed Session Law 2023-134 in October 2023. And there was Section 12.11 of that Session Law titled Air Permitting Review and Issuance Timelines. And that specified changes related to the DAQ's permitting related to General Statute 143-215.108 D2 and the definition section in the statutes 143-213. And specifically, Section 12.11A of the Session Law required that permit modifications be issued, denied, or published for public notice and comment by the division within 90 calendar days of receipt of an administratively complete application for a minor modification and within 270 calendar days for a major modification. And Section 12.11C of that Session Law added a definition for the term administratively complete to General Statute 143-213. And that was defined to mean that all information required by statute, regulation, and application form has been submitted to the department for the purpose of processing a permit application. And I will note that originally that definition used the word or, and it was later a technical correction changed that or to an and. So that's what we've reflected here on this slide. And so the time period that the division is allotted for review of the permit modification application would begin once an application was submitted to the DAQ with all components necessary to be deemed administratively complete. And so processing days is what we currently use for counting our review timelines of permit applications, all types of permit applications. And that means that any days during which the division is waiting on information from an applicant that we have requested from that applicant are not counted towards those timelines. So the clock is kind of paused. That's how we refer to it. And And that allows the division to be flexible with applicants that need more time or assistance to gather information that's been requested, since this extra time is not counted against the permit engineer's review timeline. Upon implementation of the proposed session law review timelines, the schedules for reviewing modification applications would use a combination of processing and calendar days. But the schedules for all other types of applications would remain unchanged, since those were not changed by the session law. And so this is just an overview of the 9 rules that we have proposed changes to. There's 4 of them in the O2Q 300 section. That's for processing. Those are the processing procedures for our non-Title V or state permit applications. And then there's 5 rules we're proposing modifications to in our 2Q 500 section, and that covers our Title V permit processing procedures. And so for the regulatory impact analysis of this rulemaking, we qualitatively described some possible impacts of the proposed rulemaking. And that includes things such as increased certainty for regulated entities and state personnel due to a more defined review timeline for processing complete applications for modifications. But there may also be some reduced flexibility for applicants throughout the permit review process, because these timelines now have a more defined time period. There may be some changes to the distribution of permit outcomes, possibly leading to more withdrawn applications. And since application fees are non-refundable, applicants that need to withdraw and resubmit their applications because they need more time to gather information would incur an additional permit application fee if they resubmit that application. And then there may be some adjustments to the DAQ's practices for consolidating applications, such as consolidating renewals and modifications that are ongoing at the same time. We may not be able to do that depending on when they're received, because now they have different review processes and different review timelines. And so we also did quantify some potential impacts for applicants that choose to hire external consulting services to assist with preparing their permit applications in order to avoid having to withdraw their application to gather information. And so the rulemaking does not require that anyone hire an external consultant, but we think it could be a likely outcome for some applicants, particularly those with very complex projects or those that do not have in-house expertise to assist with those permit application preparation. And so we did estimate a range of possible hourly rates for hiring an external consultant, but ultimately it would vary widely dependent on how complex the project is, how many hours are required, the type of expertise required for preparing that permit application. The rulemaking is not expected to result in any impacts on emissions, the environment, or public health, since there are no proposed changes to emission standards or the quality of DAQ's review standards for these applications. And so the RIA was approved by OSBM on August 30th, 2024. We took that to the Air Quality Committee, and subsequently we made some minor changes to a couple of the rules just to clarify and remove some redundant language. And so we updated that RIA just to reflect that. And it was reapproved by OSBM on October 24th, 2024, which we took that version of the RIA to the full EMC, and that's the version that we took to public comment as well. So we held a public hearing for these proposed rule amendments on February 4th of this year. Commissioner Deerhake served as the hearing officer for this rulemaking. The public comment period extended from January 2nd to March 3rd. And we got one set of comments from US EPA Region 4, and they provided 3 comments in their letter. 2 of the comments were related to state implementation plan or SIP submittal package that the DAQ will need to make to EPA. And we've worked with EPA and discussed this, and it relates to effective dates and things along those lines, which I'll get into on the next slide. But they do not necessitate any changes to the proposed rules, those 2 SIP-related comments. One comment did pertain to the definition of complete application in 2Q 303 and 503, and that resulted in clarifying changes to these rules, which we've reflected in Chapter 2 of the hearing officer's report. So the first comment related to the SIP submittal, EPA was requesting that changes made in 2Q 304 and 305 in a previous rulemaking action that has not yet been incorporated into the SIP. that we reflect that when we show our kind of red line strikeout versions to EPA when we make that SIP submittal, so they can see all the changes since the last SIP approved version. Again, related to the SIP, and that's not an issue for us to do, so we'll work with them and we'll be sure to do that when we make the SIP submittal. The EPA also recommended that DAQ include a letter in our SIP submittal with the date that we intend to send the certification of EPA's final approval to the state revisor of statutes. And as I'll get into on a few slides, these rules have a delayed effective date pursuant to the session law, where the rule amendments would not actually become effective until after the EPA approves them into our SIP. And there's a process where after EPA approves them, then the DEQ secretary has to notify the revisor of statutes. And then on the first day of a month, that occurs 60 days after that notice is when they would become effective. And so EPA needs that date to put in their publication when they propose approval of our SIP. And so we will work with them, and we've already kind of come up with a plan for how to calculate what that date will be, so they will have it for their notice. But again, that does not affect the rules at all. So something we can work with EPA on. And then the last comment, as we noted, EPA noted that the definitions for the term complete application in 2Q303 and 503 include a cross-reference to the term administratively complete in the statute. And a statute would not be incorporated into the SIP. And so EPA recommended just aligning those definitions and actually pulling in that language, which we have done, pulled in the relevant language from the statute, not the full term, because the full term is not necessary for the definition, but the relevant language we pulled into our definitions. So here we are in March requesting adoption by the EMC. If we receive this, we will file the rules with the Rules Review Commission for consideration at their April meeting, and the rulemaking would be on track to be completed by May. And as I mentioned before, there was some amendments to this session law, or technical corrections under session law 2024-1, section 4.13. And that required that no later than July 1st of this year, the department make a SIP amendment submittal to EPA requesting approval of these changes to North Carolina's permitting program. Approximately 60 days after EPA approves those changes, the amended rules would become effective. So the history note of these rules delays the effective date and incorporates that language from the session law with that delayed effective date. The secretary has to provide notice and the effective date on the DEQ website and by written or electronic notice to current holders of air permits issued by the department. And then the changes will apply to applications received on or after the effective date of these rules. And so for the recommendation, we have that the hearing officer recommends that the proposed amendments to 15A and CAC, 02Q, 0303, 304, 305, 312, 503, 505, 507, 515, and 525, as presented in Chapter 2 of the hearing report, the final regulatory impact analysis as presented in Chapter 6 of the hearing report, and the hearing officer's report be adopted by the EMC.
Commissioner Deerhake, as hearing officer, comments or that's your recommendation, I guess?
No comments, except the staff was very efficient and turned it around quickly. We only had one comment as mentioned, so I'm prepared to make a motion.
Okay, let me go to Commissioner Carter. I know it came through the committee. Any other comments from the committee perspective?
Just that the committee considered it in the previous meeting and approved it unanimously to come to the commission, and I also support adoption today.
Okay, Commissioner Deerhake, we're ready for let me ask, any questions for staff or for the hearing officer? Commissioner Smith.
Partly question, partly comment. Is it fair to say that any cost described in the regulatory impact analysis are attributable to the legislation rather than the rule, which is something we have said in previous instances where the rule change was driven by a legislative mandate?
Potentially, and the reason I say that is because of the kind of circular logic on the effective date. The rules would not become effective and the new processes would not be implemented until after we adopt the rules, and then those get incorporated into the SIP and EPA approves that into the SIP. And so It is definitely being driven by the session law. It's something that we're required to do under the session law. So I think that is a fair way to look at it. We didn't explicitly state that in our analysis, that it's attributable to session law versus the rulemaking. But I think that, it's definitely being driven by the session law because it's requiring us to amend these rules.
Yeah, so one question, and this may actually be more for council than for Ms. Quinlan, but it's interesting that what the statute provides is that if the agency doesn't act on the permit within the specified period of time, that the applicant can appeal to OAH. I was just curious as to whether there's been any discussion of what it is the applicant would be appealing, because it's not, the statute does not indicate that failure to act on the permit is a denial of the permit. It doesn't say failure to act is issuance of a permit, which would be very problematic. It just says it's appealable. So I was just curious if there'd been any discussion of what's appealable at that stage.
I'd say that's an open question.
Okay. Fair enough.
Any other questions of staff or the hearing officer? Okay, hearing none. Commissioner Deerhake, you have a motion?
Thank you. As the assigned hearing officer for this, I recommend the proposed amendments to 15A NCAC 2Q.0303, .0304, .0305, .0312, .0503, .0505, .0507, .0515, and .0525, as presented in Chapter 2 of this hearing report. The approved regulatory impact analysis contained in Chapter 6 of this hearing report and this hearing officer's report be adopted by the Environmental Management Commission.
Okay, we have a Commissioner Carter does a second. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing no discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you, Ms. Quinlan.
Thank you.
Okay. Request for approval of 2024 Broad River Basin Water Resources Plan. And while Ms. Mayor comes up, I'll go to Committee Subchair Smith to see if she's got any comments at the outset. I know the committee's looked at this several times, I believe, in different ways.
No, I really don't. I hadn't had a chance to look back at that.
Okay, very good. Didn't mean to put you on the spot, but the chair's not here, and here comes Ms. Mayor, so very good.
Good morning. Excuse me. Good morning. I'd like to thank commissioners and the chair for the opportunity to present the Environmental Management Commission today. My name is Nikki Maher, and I'm a member of the Basin Planning Branch. I'll be presenting the 2024 Broad River Basin Water Resources Management Plan as an action item on behalf of our branch. Pulling this plan together was a collaborative effort, and I'm happy to have a number of contributors with me today available to help answer your questions. Today, excuse me, today I will present a brief overview of the basin plan, including water quality and quantity concerns, changes or additions to the plans based on comments we received from the public, and recommendations for protecting and improving water resources. Basin-wide planning is a non-regulatory watershed-based approach to identify areas across the state where water resource concerns should be addressed. The planning process also identifies areas that need additional protection, restoration, or preservation to ensure waters of the state are meeting their designated uses. Basin water resources management plans are required under North Carolina General Statute 143-215.8b and are approved by the Environmental Management Commission every 10 years per Session Law 2012-200. Updates are provided throughout the 10-year period to address changes in water resources and modeling methodology, to report changes to wastewater permits, and to share advances in scientific knowledge. Basin plans are not a rule. Instead, they report on changes and impacts to surface and groundwater resources in the basin and identify areas that may be impacted by point and non-point sources of pollution, provide recommendations for reducing impacts to water quality and quantity, and recognize nature-based solutions as ways to reduce impacts to our natural resources and build resiliency. While these plans are prepared by the Division of Water Resources, their implementation and the protection of water resources entail the coordinated efforts of many agencies, local governments, and stakeholder groups in the state. 2024 Broad River Basin Plan is the fourth plan to be developed for the Broad River Basin by the Division of Water Resources. The basin plan includes 6 chapters that cover water quality and quantity issues across the basin. Chapters 1 through 5 are general chapters with information on basin characteristics, point and non-point sources of pollution, water quality assessments, permitted and registered activities, water supply and water resource planning and management through local and statewide initiatives, funding opportunities, and recommendations to protect water resources. Chapter 6 focuses on the 13 HUC 10 watersheds in the basin and provides information on specific water resource issues and recommendations to protect them. The Broad River Basin begins at the headwaters in the Blue Ridge Mountains and flows south-southeast through the foothills and southern Piedmont into South Carolina, where it eventually merges with the Saluda River and then the Catawba River to form the Santee River before reaching the Atlantic Ocean. The North Carolina portion of the basin covers 1,513 square miles and portions of 10 counties. Polk, Rutherford, and Cleveland counties are almost entirely within the Broad Basin boundary and account for the majority of the basin. There are 2,120 miles of classified streams and 4,569 acres of lakes and reservoirs. In general, stream gradients flatten in the basin as the topography transitions from the step pools and riffles of the mountains to the foothills and further into the rolling landscape of the Piedmont. Soils within the lower portion of the basin typically exhibit higher proportions of sand and clay, consequently presenting a heightened erosion susceptibility compared to those in the upper basin. Land cover in the basin is a mix of primarily forest, which is 62% in the dark green on the map, followed by agriculture, 19% shown in yellow, and development, 13% shown in red. Land cover and changes in land cover over time closely follow population patterns across the basin. Based on the U.S. Census data, the population in 2020 was 202,379, an increase of 5% since 2000. As of 2022, municipalities in the basin range in population size from about 140 people to 22,000, and much of the population can be found around the towns of Spindale, Rutherfordton, Forest City, and Boiling Springs, and the cities of Kings Mountain and Shelby. This is the fourth plan to be developed for the basin and covers information from 2008 to 2022. The basin plan period does not include the recent devastation to Western North Carolina communities and ecosystems from Hurricane Helene. The draft plan was posted for public comment before Helene struck. Because of the timing and the extraordinary weight of this historic event, information has been added to the plan acknowledging the hurricane and its impacts to the basin. The effects of the hurricane are still being assessed and will be reflected in future basin plans. It is DWR's hope that the 2024 plan will serve as a helpful tool for comparison to evaluate short and long-term changes in the basin as we learn and time progresses. In an effort to share information in a user-friendly format, the basin planning is developing a story map to accompany the basin plan. The story map will also be used to provide updates as information is collected and evaluated. DWR monitors in-stream ambient and biological stations located throughout the state to assess water quality conditions for the biennial integrated report as required by the Clean Water Act. Monitoring data was available for 43% of the classified stream miles and 85% of the classified reservoir acres in the basin. The 2022 integrated report documented that 67.7 miles of streams, 11%, and 1,040.4 acres, 53% of reservoir waters monitored were exceeding water quality standards or impaired for one or more criteria or parameters. Impaired waters are placed in Category 5 of Section 303D of the Clean Water Act. All waters in North Carolina are impaired for fish tissue mercury due to statewide fish consumption advisory for several fish species, and those are not included in the statewide numbers. Impaired waters for 2022 are shown in red on the map. Most of the 67.7 stream miles that are identified as impaired are listed for biological integrity. Unfortunately, biological monitoring decreased from a total of 56 stations in 2015 to 4 benthos stations and no fish community stations sampled in 2021. Limited staff resources and travel restrictions due to the COVID-19 pandemic hampered additional biological monitoring in the basin. An upper section of the First Broad River is impaired for turbidity, and Kings Mountain Reservoir is impaired for temperature. The next few slides are going to show where there are parameters of concern based on data collected from ambient water quality monitoring stations managed by DWR. These waters are not in Category 5 of the impaired waters list. Parameters of concern identified and discussed in the plan include turbidity, temperature, fecal coliform bacteria, nutrients, and metals. High turbidity levels were measured in the lower section of the First Broad River and the lower part of Buffalo Creek. Both are located in Cleveland County and receive runoff from agricultural watersheds as well as from urban and industrial landscapes and new construction sites. Turbidity levels tended to correlate with stream flow, indicating levels were primarily non-point source stormwater driven. Ambient monitoring system data indicated the warmest temperatures over the last 5 years of the data period, which is 2018 to 2022, occurred in the Piedmont portion of the basin along the main stem of the Broad River and lower portions of the First and Second Broad Rivers. The 2022 integrated report had no impairments for fecal coliform bacteria, but bacteria levels varied widely over the basin monitoring cycle. The highest fecal coliform levels sampled are all located in Cleveland County, which has the greatest number of animal operations in the basin. The county is also more developed in the lower portion, and stormwater runoff from urban areas in Shelby and Boiling Springs, faulty septic systems, and biosolid fields are also contributors to fecal coliform bacteria levels in these watersheds. Nutrients and metals are also parameters of concern in the basin. Currently, nutrients are collected from three of the ambient monitoring system stations. Adjacent and upstream land use can significantly impact nutrient levels in streams and other water bodies. More nutrient monitoring in the basin could allow for more comprehensive assessment of basin-wide conditions over time. There were no existing total metal impairments in the Broad River Basin, but there are several metal finishing and fabrication facilities located in the lower part of the basin. Routine metals monitoring with the new dissolved metals water quality standard is recommended to help DWR better understand the impact metals may be having on aquatic environments. Lakes are monitored monthly from May through September on a 5-year monitoring cycle. In the Broad River Basin, 4 lakes or reservoirs were monitored. Kings Mountain Reservoir, also known as Moss Lake, Lake Adger, and Lake Lure were monitored in 2010, 2015, and 2021. Lake Summit was last monitored in 2010. Trophic status of lakes includes nutrients and chlorophyll A concentrations, along with Secchi depth to calculate the lake's biological productivity. Kings Mountain Reservoir is classified as Water Supply 3 CA. The reservoir historically ranged from oligotrophic to eutrophic since monitoring began in 1989, suggesting that the water body is shifting from a more biologically productive system, which can result in algal blooms. Algal monitoring in the reservoir shows that algal species are shifting to a more potentially harmful cyanobacteria blue-green algal dominated system. While the lake is not currently exceeding the chlorophyll A water quality standard, the shift in algal species to potentially harmful cyanobacteria and a continued shift towards a more eutrophic system is an indicator that conditions in the lake are degrading and need to be observed closely. Lake Adger, Lake Lure, and Lake Summit are currently meeting water quality standards. Lake Adger is classified as Water Supply 4 CA, but the trophic status shifted from oligotrophic to mesotrophic in 2015, with monitoring data documenting elevated chlorophyll A, total phosphorus, and total organic nitrogen values. Lake Lure is classified as Class B trout and has consistently been oligotrophic since 1989. Lake Summit has remained oligotrophic since 1989. All 4 lakes will be monitored in 2025. There are several programs that provide information about how much water is being used in North Carolina. There are also drinking water protection programs managed by DWR's Public Water Supply section. Water use data is collected by Water Supply Planning and Groundwater Resources in DWR. Agriculture water use is reported through North Carolina Department of Agricultural and Consumer Services. There are over 500 stream miles and nearly 1,300 acres classified as water supply watersheds in the Broad River Basin. Currently, there are no interbasin transfer certificates in the basin. Certificates are required for interbasin transfers that are greater than 2 million gallons per day. Self-supplied domestic water use is estimated at the county scale. A draft of the 2012 Broad River Basin Hydrologic Report Model is included as an appendix to the basin plan and provides an evaluation of the water resources in the basin at that time. The report describes where existing surface water supplies may be sufficient or insufficient to meet future water demands for public water systems. Future water demands were derived from registered water withdrawers and local water supply plans submitted by the public water supply systems that use water from the basin. DWR is seeking funds to update the hydrologic model for the Broad River Basin. Any future reports generated will be added as a supplement to the basin plan. Based on 2022 data, water demand in the basin totals 296.7 million gallons per day. 21.4 million gallons per day is used by public water systems as reported in the local water supply plans and the water withdrawal and transfer registration program. Data related to agricultural water use was collected and reported to the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. Based on data reported in the 2022 Agriculture Water Use Survey, 9 unique operations had an average daily use of 124,335 gallons per day and a withdrawal capacity of 1.3 million gallons per day from surface and groundwater sources. Both surface and groundwater sources are used in the basin. However, almost all of the water used in the basin is from surface water sources. The public comment period for the 2024 Broad River Basin Plan was extended from 30 days to 60 days due to Hurricane Helene. 128 emails were received during the public comment period, the majority in response to an action alert sent by Mountain True to its members. The majority of those responses were a form letter. 17 included personalized modifications and 3 were independent responses. The Broad and Green River Keepers, American Rivers, North Carolina Division of Soil and Water Conservation, and the North Carolina Farm Bureau Federation also provided comprehensive comments and suggestions. There's comments included: concerns regarding the plan's relevance to the impacts from Hurricane Helene, requests to recognize recreational water use for both economic and ecological purposes throughout the basin, requests that information about employing resilient infrastructure during rebuilding be shared, general text edits and language improvements, questions regarding minimum stream flows, dam releases, and dam removals, and stakeholders also encouraged DEQ to follow through with recommendations presented in the plan. The following are changes that were made to the basin plan based on those public comments that we received. Hurricane Helene is acknowledged throughout the plan, and the current plan serves as a benchmark for pre-impact comparison. As recovery progresses, reports will be posted on DEQ websites and within the Broad Basin Story Map as information is reviewed and finalized. Recreational water use is acknowledged in the plan, but based on comments, general text was added about the importance of recreational water use for human and biological health and its significant value to the local economy. General information has been incorporated about the flood resiliency blueprint, its overarching goals, and its role in strengthening community preparedness. General revisions have been made throughout the document to enhance clarity, particularly regarding cost share programs managed by the Division of Soil and Water Conservation. Information was added about the Stream Flow Rehabilitation Assistance Program, which provides funding to implement projects that help reduce flooding, restore streams, and protect the integrity of drainage infrastructure in North Carolina's waterways. Comments were made regarding minimum stream flow for recreational use and aquatic habitat, coordinating flows between dams in succession on a river, removal of non-functioning or obsolete dams, and reevaluating jurisdictional licensing through the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. These comments will be shared with appropriate agencies and/or programs. The following are recommendations that were included in the Basin Plan. Under the category of point source, the Basin Plan advises that the Basin Planning and Modeling Assessment branches continue collaborating with permitting and monitoring programs to ensure the collection of appropriate effluent and in-stream data. It also recommends that DWR work with point sources to reduce or eliminate pollutants of concern before they enter surface waters. Also recommended is to identify and reduce infiltration and exfiltration in publicly owned treatment works collection systems to minimize stormwater intrusion, decrease pollutant loads, and improve system performance. Non-point source recommendations include continuing to implement and improve sediment and erosion control stormwater management programs, encouraging employment of floodplains, wetlands, and riparian buffers as natural filters, BMP retrofits, green infrastructure, and low-impact development. Continuing to advocate advocate for and expand financial support to cost share programs in urban, agricultural, and forestry sectors to provide technical assistance and encourage the voluntary implementation of BMPs, and encouraging development of local watershed restoration or watershed action plans that identify sources of pollution and BMPs needed to reduce pollution. Water quality monitoring and staffing recommendations include continuing to monitor existing stations and assess their locations to determine the need for additional monitoring. Expand monitoring efforts near or downstream of land-applied residual fields, agricultural operations, county landfills, and rural residential areas with septic systems to better understand their impact on water quality. Evaluating and supporting staffing and resource needs for monitoring programs. Consistent ongoing monitoring offers our agencies valuable insights into both current and long-term conditions, aiding in decision-making, modeling efforts, and identifying potential pollutant sources and effective solutions. Water quantity recommendations include continuing to collaborate with agencies to understand water use patterns in order to plan for future growth and long-term sustainability, ensuring that water users are properly accounted for, uses are protected, and effective management strategies are in place during drought conditions. Performing regional groundwater availability studies to assess sustainable yields for more efficient resources management, and continuing funding and expansion of USGS flow gauges to assess long-term water availability and determine real-time in-stream conditions. The 2024 Broad River Basin Plan is intended to serve as a guide and resource for water resource managers and planners, local and state leaders overseeing and making decisions on funding water-related projects, and the public regarding water resource issues and concerns in the basin. Conditions and circumstances have evolved throughout the development of the plan, but the Basin Plan serves as a starting point for ongoing discussion, coordination, and collaboration among stakeholders. Continued monitoring and assessments are essential to accurately evaluate the health of this critically important resource and ensure its protection as our state continues to grow. DWR requests the approval of the 2024 Broad River Basin Water Resources Plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. And I'd just like to say too, it's a very important basin. I think mostly in North Carolina, it's not one of our bigger basins. It's in a very rural basin. But in South Carolina, the water that comes out of North Carolina is used by the Spartanburg area and by Columbia. So it's much more industrial in South Carolina and much more dependent on the partnership of the two states. So doing what we do here really has an impact on the folks downstream, albeit in another state. But I know they have looked, when they did their basin plan and completed it recently, they were looking at what we were doing here and what we had done in the past and trying to merge the two together. So I think it's been very beneficial that way as well. Open it up for comments from board members or any questions of staff. Commissioner Balin.
Well, this is really just to follow up on what you just said, is do we actively coordinate with South Carolina, since what we do in our basin impacts them? Like, I didn't hear this in the comment in your presentation about whether or not South Carolina has commented, and maybe I missed it.
We did not receive comments from South Carolina during the public comment period. Another basin planner and I have been listening in on the meetings the ones they had online. We were able to listen in to their the South Carolina meetings, and we haven't necessarily directly coordinated with them during this process, but the interest in water quantity from South Carolina is something that we're doing more of now in North Carolina as well. So I anticipate having more conversations, but not exactly in this plan.
And Ken Tuck, who chaired their basin planning, private citizen, is a friend of mine, and we've talked about quite a bit, and I know they share. What we see more is that the three basins that hit between the two states are actually this one, but the Catawba more, as Jeff Lineberger said yesterday, committee, and then the Yadkin PD basin, which is the PD basin in South Carolina. And that, for them, that includes the Waccamaw, the lumber too, from us. So you see much more in those two basins, I think, is interchange because there's more IBTs. As Nikki said, there's really not any IBTs in this basin, and it's mainly rural, but coordination is a lot probably more intense in those other two basins where North Carolina is taking water and moving it around before it gets to them. So, yes, Commissioner Yarborough.
Did you have something else?
No,
Well, I thought you
thank you.
raised your hand. Yeah, I think you listed that 62% is forestry in that basin. The concern to me is what's happened with Helene, with the forestry industry. You're looking at 800,000 acres of timber across the region because of the down timber from Helene. And the broad was impacted as well. But in fact, I told the joke not long ago that squirrels are going to have a SNAP program because there's no oaks left in that. But the reality is, wondered if it needs to be put in there that since we have no pulp market because of the Canton Mill being gone, and now there's no place to put this timber, there's going to be an opportunity for a tremendous fire. If that fire would be a significant thing for environmental management at some point. So it's just something I may want, I don't know if it need to be included or some kind of reference to that. I don't know what to do about it, but it's something that really we're going to have to start considering.
I think there's a way we could handle that if you want to. We could approve the plan today like it is and maybe amend the plan or have another document to go with it, or look at that under a separate initiative. Or we could hold the plan up to add something if you want to. That would be our decision. Commissioner Bailey.
Yes, and I was also wondering about that too, because you mentioned it was before Helene, and that's not accounted for in this report. So, I mean, a lot of the report has to do with monitoring. So can we even monitor some of these sites right now?
So 2025, not necessarily specific to forestry, but 2025 is the next cycle for the basin-wide sampling for biological assessment group, lakes group, and of course we have ambient monitoring that goes on monthly. So we're finding out that they're all planning to go out, but I think they're going to find out when they get boots on the ground what their sampling sites look like in the coming months. So they're going back and we'll have new information. The plan had been from, 2008 to 2022 was our data window. So we stopped well short of, Helene. So the plan is to have information, our plan is to have information as it comes in and is available to make it accessible by updating our story map, and maybe like if we need to, come up with amended information. That is our plan.
Let me ask, put Director Rogers on the spot if we can. Director Rogers, I think my preference would be, since this is a plan and we've got a lot of work going into this plan and the Hurricane Helene stuff is evolving, that we probably, and we'll see what the wish of the EMC is, but we move on this plan today and ask you the feasibility of making an amendment to this plan to include some of the things that Commissioner Yarborough said, instead of holding the whole plan up. Do you think it's feasible we could amend this plan?
Absolutely. And I think, as Nikki said, we're going to be working on updating the plan and giving a storybook so we can see what's happened and the impact of the hurricane in the area. So we're intending to keep it updated and updating it as we move forward and learn more about the impacts.
All right, let me press in a little bit harder, because I'd like to see Commissioner Yarborough's stuff in there sooner than later.
Okay.
Can we have a first update on that, maybe by the end of the summer or something? July, something?
Yeah.
Commissioner Yarborough?
And the reason I bring it up, it is going to be hugely important from federal levels. With the
Right.
Farm Service Agency has a program for reforestation. Without some kind of data to show that we have this loss, it's going to be very difficult to make the claim and the request, and any data is going to be very beneficial to be able to say that we're going to have help or we can't make it work.
Understood.
Okay. Commissioner Tweedy.
Okay. Few comments here, but specifically to that one, I was assigned as the Broad River liaison for the EMC last year, so I got the opportunity to work with this mayor and Miss Raquette on this plan. Most of the work had been done by the time I got involved. They did, I think, a tremendous job, and I was able to review the draft, provide some comments. I looked through the public comments, and there were some public comments about the, we're not addressing the Helene damage in this report. And my opinion with them at the time was, I think it's very, very important to document through 2024 the condition of the watershed prior to Helene, because everybody acknowledges there's going to be tremendous changes we expect. So having that baseline documented is critically important. And I think they did a really nice job of doing that and then putting text in the plan that acknowledges what Helene is, that's occurred and that's going to be something that's assessed going forward. So, but I fully support the idea of doing maybe a supplemental document. I'm not sure the right format, but I also would support going ahead and approving the plan today for that very reason.
Okay. Commissioner Yarborough, how does it sound to you? Does that sound okay today?
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I wasn't trying to say not to approve the plan. I was just saying, that is there a way to amend it, just, or add to it, or come up with some kind of methodology that says, well, there was this much damage? Because I think that will certainly help when we try to make the case for federal funding.
Mr. Deerhake, and then Commissioner Ellison.
I think an addendum would be the way to go, so that you've got a before and after, but still two discrete documents for easy comparison. I'll be very interested to see what the monitoring shows, especially in the benthos of some of these water bodies, especially lakes like Lake Lure, the extent of damage done by the hurricane, and also the rate of recovery of the benthos. That I think will be interesting. I did have a question about the Kings Mountain or Moss Lake. You said it was temperature impaired. What is the purpose of that lake? Is it water supply or flood control? Do you know? Or both?
I should have a better answer. I believe it's both, but I would want to verify.
And do you know what the any information about the temperature impairment?
Actually, I believe for the next cycle of the integrated report, it's going to be listed as data inconclusive.
Inconclusive.
There were some questions about some of the way the information was applied.
Is it a shallow lake?
I actually don't know.
Okay. We don't
it's in a
often
Piedmont,
get
so.
temperature impairments, I don't think, for,
Natural.
yeah. So I'm just
I think they
curious.
can look back in for it.
Yeah,
I think
I'd
it's
be
up
happy
for
to
it.
give you more information.
Just email Commissioner Deerhake if you
Yeah,
want.
thank
Okay.
you.
Commissioner Ellison.
Thank you.
It's not like it's
I would kind of jump on the bandwagon a little bit on the Helene effects. And I would encourage you to get some spatial, even relatively preliminary spatial analysis. And I think the commission would like to see where the forest damage has occurred. Because if per Commissioner Yarborough's worst case scenario, you've already got a river basin with turbidity issues, fine sediment issues. You've got highly erodible, just natural high erodibility in a lot of the river basin. And if you add fire on top of the Helene damage, the downstream effects are going to be substantial, and some of that can be prevented. There's an awful lot of public land out there, and recommendations, again, based on some spatial analysis, where can the state help protect from worst case scenarios because of all this public land? Perhaps it's reforestation. There's all kinds of, fire lanes, prescribed burning. There's all kinds of things that can be done. But I think we need to think about doing it to prevent potentially very serious downstream impacts from worst case events.
Okay, let's do this, guys. Let's do, hear what you think about this, but let's do the primary motion. The main motion today would be to accept the plan as it is, like we've requested. And then a second motion, independent motion, for an amendment, that we would get at least a progress update on somewhere at the July meeting for the EMC. And I'm thinking if we wait till September, we got hurricane season coming again and all kind of things could happen.
Don't
So-
talk like that.
I know. But I would like to get an update, just sitting as a chair, and you guys make the final decision, but I think we need an update, if not a finished addendum by sometime in July, if we could get just an update. So if that suits, do I have a primary motion to accept the plan as requested by DWR? Okay, Commissioner Tweedy, and thank you for your service on the river. I did know that last time in committee, but I'd forgotten it today, so a lot of things. So sorry about that. And thank you for getting involved with this, albeit near the end of it, but you made the contributions. Kind of a second on that, Commissioner Deerhake, seconds. Any discussion on proving the Broad River Basin Plan? Hearing none, call for the vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. Now we'll entertain a motion if that's the pleasure of the board for a amendment, we'll call it, that would include some Hurricane Helene information, including forest impacts and impact on water resources. Commissioner,
I make a motion that
Ellison.
the
I about called
department,
him Dugan, and I knew that wasn't right because he's right here in my ear. So.
I make a motion that the department return to the July EMC meeting with and present an update based on preliminary analyses. And again, at the November meeting with some more detailed spatial analysis of where threats to the river basin that could generate severe downstream impacts. And perhaps that would be documentation. Well, I guess I can't get into that with a motion, right?
Can we Council, can you simplify that motion for us, or do you want him to try to, can you restate it in maybe like maybe 50 words or less?
Return with a presentation in the July meeting, updating the commission on your continuing assessments. And again, at the November meeting with a little more detailed assessment as a more detailed assessment period. So.
Commissioner Yarborough, is that acceptable to you, or do you want to modify it?
I'll second that.
Okay, second that. I probably should have took the second before I asked staff. Everybody nod at me, staff, if you're kind of okay with that?
Yes.
Just do want to note that we are broadening the scope of the plan as it relates to forestry and the impacts. Obviously, we'll do our best to work with the Department of Agriculture, get information and bring that back to you. But that is a little beyond the scope of the basin planning effort that we have.
You may be able to get some work from from Wildlife Resources as well, because they have a lot of that property there in Green River.
Yeah.
So they'll probably give you some advance notice.
And I think the intent is the impact of the forest situation on water quality and water resources, right?
Yeah, and I
That's
think
the
we'll
focus.
be able to get with Demler as well with landslide mapping as well. So.
Okay, very good. So department understands. We got a motion and a second on the table. Any discussion on the motion? Mr. Deerhake?
I just think that they may not have their water quality monitoring results by July. Just be prepared that that may not be available.
Right, and we'll just have an update of where we're at, but I think the expectation is we get as close to a finished product as we can, or the knowns and unknowns by July, right? We don't want it just to hang out there for another year, so.
But since they're monitoring in 2025, maybe in 2026, you might want to ask
For another
about the
update.
monitoring results.
That's right, okay.
And again, I think if they can come up with something that looks official, that says we have this much damage in the forestry, and not only the feds, but the state as well, like Wildlife Resources, they may have some opportunity, but they have no funding. That means the legislature, private landowners as well. If we don't do something, I can assure you, we're going to have a fire.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, let's do one more and then we'll take a brief break. Let's do item number 3 today, 25-14, request approval, the hearing officer's report for proceedings for adoption of the proposed amendments to 15A NCAC 02T pursuant to Session Law 2023-55 and the final IRA.
Good morning, Chairman Solomon and members of the commission. My name is Nathaniel Thornburg, and I'm the supervisor of the non-discharge branch in the Division of Water Resources. Just for some background, on May 9th and September 12th of last year, the EMC voted to proceed to public notice and hearing for amendments to Rules 15A NCAC 02T.0118 and 0114 respectively, pursuant to the 3 session laws noted. The public hearing and comment period, the public comment period opened on November 1st of last year. We held our public hearing on December 5th, and Commissioner Tweedy was our hearing officer. And then the comment period closed on December 31st of last year. We did not receive any written or oral comments. Just a summary of the rule changes that are proposed. For wastewater design flow rates, in paragraph B1, it's establishing that 75 gallons per day per bedroom when there's a wastewater system that serves 2 or more dwelling units, that these units have yet to be connected to a wastewater system and the permittee has allocated capacity. Paragraph B2 is similar, but it establishes 75 gallons per day per bedroom for 2 or more dwelling units. It's yet to be connected to a wastewater system, and then an applicant or a permittee does not have allocated capacity. And the last change to this rule is paragraph E, and this establishes 75 gallons per day per habitable room for residential property serving 2 or more dwelling units that's on a south or east of the Atlantic Intercoastal Waterway, and it's used as a vacation. The amendments to Rule 2T.0118, the demonstration of future wastewater treatment capacities. Paragraph B, it establishes that permittees that are in counties that meet one of the 2 thresholds that are listed, they may allocate 110% of their existing capacity and increase its allocation amount to 115% when a system expansion is within 24 months of completion. If that permittee exceeds its current permitted monthly flow more than once in a 12-month period, then they cannot allocate more than 100% of the existing system's hydraulic capacity until they've complied with the permitted monthly flow for at least 12 consecutive months. As you see, this is the remaining tentative rulemaking schedule. And then the recommendation, DWR requests that the Environmental Management Commission approve the hearing officer's report and adoption of the proposed amended rules, 15A, NCAC 02T.0114 and 15A, NCAC 02T.0118 pursuant to session laws 2023-55, 2023-134, and 2023-137.
Commissioner Tweedy, were you hearing officer for this? That's what I thought. See, I remembered, right? I know, well, I missed it again. Sorry about that. Comments from you or observations from you?
I really don't have any comments. This was about as easy a one, I think, to cut my teeth on as possible. So as Nathaniel mentioned, there were no comments and doesn't seem to be a controversial item. So I'm ready to make the motion whenever.
Isn't this the one that we kind of started to go out with and pulled it back to making the tweak to the language? Or am I
Yes.
dreaming?
I
So it
think
wasn't
this
as
is
straightforward as anything, but it was, you had to tweak it a little bit, so.
And I will reiterate what Commissioner Deerhake said earlier in hers, is that the staff made this process extremely easy for me. So thank you all.
You're welcome, sir.
Okay, any questions from the members of Commissioner Tweedy or staff? Okay, hearing none, Commissioner Tweedy, you were prepared to make a motion?
Yes, sir. As the hearing officer, I'll move that the EMC approve the hearing officer's report and adoption of the proposed amended rules 15A NCAC 02T.0114 and 15A NCAC 02T.0118 pursuant to Session Law 23-55, Session Law 23-134, and Session Law 2023-137.
Okay, do we have a second on that?
Second, Bill Yarborough.
Commissioner Yarborough seconds. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It's unanimous. Before we go to break, I want to say two things. I meant to say it at the planning thing last time, but just thank the planning staff for all they do. It is easy in these merger organizations that have planning and regulatory as part of the DWQ type program for planning to get shifted aside. I really appreciate the planning, and without the planning, we really couldn't do the other things we need to do. It is one reason, and it's worked out okay this year, that I tried to move the basin planning out from underneath the Water Quality Committee, which was handling a lot of rules and regulatory type stuff in that department, over to the Water Quality Group, where we could make sure the planning group really had prime time in the committee and had plenty of time to do their work. So we'll judge that in the summer of how that went over the past year. But I do want to say that I appreciate what all of us do for planning and the staff does for planning, and it is a vital part of what we do. I'd also add, as Commissioner Tweedy said, to thank you guys as hearing officers. I know I've tried to move it around and get people involved, but we had quite a lot of new members last year. And it's important for you guys to get to know staff and also get to know the process. So I really appreciate it. Everybody on the commission that served as a hearing officer for that experience and that interaction you guys have gotten with staff. So with that, let's take about let's do 10 minutes, okay? Let's come back at 10:20. Means we'll probably be back at 10:25, but we'll shoot for 10:20 and come back and try to finish the agenda before lunch. Thank you. Here we go. Can we go back live? Commissioner Keen? All right, it is a little after 10:25 and we will move forward now. Back to order. Item number 4 on the agenda, item 25-15, request approval to proceed to public notice and hearing with proposed amendment to 15A NCAC 02B.0202 and associated regulatory impact analysis pursuant to session law 2023-63. Ms. Homewood.
Good morning. I'm Sue Homewood with the DWR 401 and Buffer Permitting Branch, and I am here to discuss a rule change to clarify the definition of wetlands in compliance with Session Law 2023-63. So Session Law 23-63 stated that the wetlands definition in 15A NCAC 02B 0202 required changing, and it specified exactly the language to be changed. That wetlands classified as waters of the state are restricted to waters of the United States as defined by federal regulations. The session law dictated that the commission shall adopt to amend the wetlands definition consistent with this section. The division has been implementing this session law since its implementation in, I think it was late June 2023. So the change, the only amendment to the rule is the definition of wetlands, which is, as I said, in 2B0202, and we added the sentence per the legislation that wetlands are classified as waters of the state are restricted to waters of the United States. Because the proposed amendments were required by session law, and the session law implemented those changes immediately and directly, this rule change amendment does not have any impacts, costs, or benefits to local government, state government, or the regulated community. We have presented regulatory impact analysis to this committee. There were some comments. We revised the regulatory impact analysis, and that revision was approved by OSBM the end of December 2024 and presented to the Water Quality Committee in January of 2025. This is the approximate timeline. We were in front of the Water Quality Committee in January, and here today, we will proceed to publish the public hearing and comment period. It should be scheduled for April, which would make the public hearing between June 2nd and June 16th. And bringing a hearing officer's report back to this committee in September. If approved, those would go to OAH in September. And then the session law exempts this rule change from RRC review. And so an effective date would be pending a legislative review, and that timing would be with the 2026 session. Because these rules are part of the water quality standards and the triennial review, the rule amendment post-legislative approval would have to go to EPA for final approval. So we cannot predict an implementation date, but as I said, we are implementing these right now. So I'm here today to DWR request that the Environmental Management Commission approve to proceed to public notice and hearing for the proposed amended rule 15A NCAC 02B 0202 and the associated regulatory impact analysis as directed by Session Law 2023-63. Happy to answer any questions.
Commissioner Keen, I know this is purely procedural, so you're probably ready for a motion. But do we need any questions of staff or Commissioner Keen as the Water Quality Commission Chairman? Okay, hearing none, are you ready for a motion, Commissioner Keen?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Motion would be that we move to approve this request that the Environmental Management Commission approve to proceed to public notice hearing for the proposed amendment rule 15A NCAC 02B.0202 and the associated regulatory impact analysis as directed Session Law 2003-63.
Do we have a second? Commissioner Baumgartner, Commissioner Carter seconds. He raised his hand before the wink nod went up and down. Any discussion on the motion? Commissioner Smith.
I'm going to vote against the motion, and I want to explain why. I think this is, as we've discussed before, extremely bad environmental policy to outsource decisions about protection of state waters to the decision of a federal agency about what federal jurisdiction is. So that's just fundamentally not a good direction. But having said that, a process question also comes up, which is that the General Assembly unfortunately has gotten into what I think is the very bad habit of doing what they did with this session law, which is to attempt to dictate the wording of an administrative rule and then cause the session law to expire when the rule is adopted, and without ever changing fundamental general statutes that actually do define what state waters are. And so we operate under an existing definition of waters in GS 143-212, which says that waters means any stream, river, brook, swamp, lake, sound, tidal estuary, bay, creek, reservoir, waterway, or other body of accumulation of water, whether surface or underground, public or private, or natural or artificial, that is contained in, flows through, or borders upon any portion of this state, including any portion of the Atlantic Ocean over which the state has jurisdiction. That definition has not been amended by the General Assembly. The session law expires when this rule is adopted. I think it raises questions of whether, looking toward the future, whether the rule will be considered consistent with state law, given the failure of the General Assembly to actually amend the definition of waters in the general statutes. And that's just a bad practice. We just voted on some changes to other rules that responded to legislation in which the General Assembly did actually amend the general statutes, and we were revising our rules to be consistent with the changes in state law. That's not what happened here, and I think it creates a really unfortunate situation in terms of potential conflict between EMC rules and the general statutes under which the EMC actually operates its water permitting programs. So for that reason, I'm going to vote against. It's a protest vote. I think it's just a terrible process legally and administratively.
Understood. Thank you. Any comments? Commissioner Ellison.
Question for Commissioner Smith. So you plan to vote to violate the statute? Is that, because the statute directs the rule change?
No, I am voting against adoption of the rule because I believe the rule will turn out to be inconsistent with a general statute that has not been amended. And the session law that directed the change in the rule will expire as soon as the rule is adopted. That's in the session law itself.
Okay, thank you. Let's move on. Any other comments or questions? Commissioner Tweedy. Yes, staff, we hadn't made a motion yet. No, we have made a motion. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. So we're about, I don't think quite a year yet into the application coming out of Sackett, I think, of how the rules have kind of changed.
Can we restrict this to after the motion? We got a motion thing. Let's not get into Sackett right now and all that.
I thought once the motion passed, we're done with this item.
Well, we can bring the back up on Sackett. I don't think Sackett's germane to what we're doing here. That's what I'm saying. And we've already got a motion.
I was just using
second.
it for context.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, let me ask, I was curious if you've got insight into have you seen instances where wetlands now are being lost that wouldn't have been lost a year or two ago? I'm not looking for specific places or people or anything like that. I'm just trying to get a sense of scale. If you have anything you could share on that.
We are seeing some instances where projects still require 404 and 401 authorizations, and they also have non-jurisdictional wetlands under the new rules. So we have anecdotal evidence, and they range from 1/10 of an acre of wetlands to up to 20 acres on a site. So we are aware that they're out there that would have required permits before the current rule.
Right. Now, and I'm just going to say it one more time, guys. I don't think there's any documentation that I've seen, and Ms. Homewood just said it's anecdotal. We've got a motion on the table, which is to take this out to public approval. We can have discussion about wetlands and how many we lost, but I don't know how many we've lost because of this. I've not seen it documented. And I know if it's anything, it's anecdotal. So I'm gonna respectfully say, let's quit this line of questioning and get it to the motion. We've got a motion and a second to take this to public comment, to public notice and the RA. So let's take a vote on that. We'll get to have your conversation after this. Okay? Call for the vote. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
One no. Commissioner Smith, another no. Commissioner Bailey, and Commissioner Deerhake.
I'm sorry, I believe, did you capture?
Oh, Commissioner Gibson.
Commissioner Gibson.
Let's make sure we got a count. I believe we vote carries. Okay, so we approve. Ms. Homewood, you get to stay here. Commissioner Tweedy, give you, due to ask your question here.
I guess I'll go to comments now. I mean, I completely agree with the sentiments of Commissioner Smith. I think the logic in this is poor. In one respect, we're losing protections for wetlands, and then on the other respect, we're hearing concern about flood resiliency and people getting flooded and homes and roads and infrastructure, and we're putting millions and millions of dollars into that. It's like one thing is spiting the other, and I just don't think it's good policy. I know where we are, but it's concerning to me, and I'm afraid there are instances as well that we may not even be aware of. The regulatory community may not even be aware of, because now there's interpretations being made that, well, we don't even have to go get a permit for this. We're just going to do it. That's speculation on my behalf, but I think time will tell if that's going to be the case. I think when we're losing storage in the upper parts of watersheds and then spending millions and millions of dollars are going to be needed to spend to try to get resiliency down further in the watershed, that's just bad logic, in my opinion. I'll leave it at that point alone.
Understood, and appreciate the point. Okay, we will name Commissioner Duggan. I'll look at that and do a hearing officer for this within the next day or two, so you can have it. Okay,
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Homewood. Next item 2516 is request for approval to send to the RC a request to reschedule 15A NCAC 02 reports for earlier review as part of the periodic review and expiration of existing rules. Now, this one is primarily mine. You gonna support me on? Okay, you're not going anywhere. Okay, all right. So our 2A rules, and this was on my watch last time, but they were judged last time as
Necessary without
substantive public comment interest without public interest. So those rules were bypassed. Those rules still have within them references to the North Carolina Department of Health and DHNR. They're that old. So they were bypassed for any review and readoption last time, and they were pushed toward the end of the process this time, which would have given them almost 20 years without review or readoption. And so I'm asking, like our 2I rules that are doing earlier, to move these rules up in the process to get them straightened out sooner than later and reviewed and readopted, so that we can at least be current within maybe a 15-year window, not a 20-year window. Council, any other comment on that? I know we've talked about this in detail.
Yeah, just a little bit further context. This is all part of the periodic review process, which you all have heard about multiple times in the last few days, so I'm not going to go into that. But there are, in addition to the 2A rules, just being dated in terms of, I think we're 2 or 3 predecessor agencies to what DEQ is now. We also have citations in the 2A rules that refer to other portions of your rules that no longer exist. There's also some inconsistency with federal statute in terms of the requirements for who sits on the NPDES committee. These are not going to be terribly substantive changes in these rules, but rather than doing the updates now and then doing them again for the periodic rule review process, we're just asking that the RRC let us do this once and move the process up 1 year from when they would otherwise be due through the periodic rule review reports. The reason that it's only 1 year in advance is because of the amount of time that it takes us to get through the process of even getting the designations done for these reports to the RRC. And if anybody has questions on that, I can certainly go through the timeline of it. But the reality is there are 3 rules here. They need some updates. We thought it would be better to do it once as part of the periodic review as opposed to doing it twice to do the updates and then do the periodic review.
Commissioner Ellison.
Just to clarify, we're moving this up on this group of rules. Does that then mean we don't have to do another periodic review?
Yes.
Does it, how, it
Would be
changes
the
that for
periodic
10 years?
review. Yes, this would be the periodic review.
Okay, okay, thank you.
Commissioner Smith.
Does this put these rules on a different timeline from the other water quality rules?
These
Water
are,
quality
These are
one.
rules of the commission, not
No,
rules of
I
the-
understand. I just wondered if they had been tied before to any of the other rulemaking packages that go through.
No, it's just
Periodic
when we
review.
ask to put them in there. Okay, hearing none, need a motion on this action as it's written. Number 5.
Chair, I'll make a motion to approve sending to the RRC a request to reschedule the 15A NCAC 02A reports for earlier review as part of the periodic review and expiration of existing rules.
Have a second. Mr. Bailey seconds. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye. Aye, it's unanimous. Okay. That wraps up action items. We have a couple information items, and I'll start off by introducing the first one. At our January meeting, John Heisman, who's somewhere probably there he is. Hello, John. John gave us an update on Upper Neuse River Basin Association rules, or Falls Lake rules, which is Upper Neuse River Basin Association is kind of helping drive those. Comment was made that the way the statute read was the earlier of 2 dates, or as part of the periodic review. What came out of that is John had said, and he'll get to speak here in a second, but rulemaking had already begun, right? Now, I knew the process had already begun, or I wouldn't ask him the question, right? But again, the rulemaking really can't start till we start being informed of it. I wanted John to come back and update us on timelines, because one of the big things is one of the things we preach is adaptive management. A long time with Falls and Jordan, and now we have 10 years and $10 million roughly. I'll let him clarify that, but we've done that for a long time, and now we have the information we need. In some cases, it may make the rules more stringent. In other cases, it's going to make them less stringent. Okay, but it's all based on the data and the science. If we wait 2 or 3 more years to process this thing through, I think we're not following what the session law anticipates, especially since when we go to the RRC with the schedule for rules review and readoption, they really don't know how much money we've spent and what the intent here was. We are at a stopping point and we're ready for rules readoption. And so what I wanted to have in front of us was an expedited schedule. If we could make an expedited schedule for this, which may mean we go back to the RRC or not, but hear what the staff had to say. But I also requested for this meeting a rules, draft rules or a framework. I'm not sure John's got that, but I have that. They're existing rules and they've been marked up in this process. And I know from other people that call me is they've got 3 issues that are kind of tough that they're trying to work through. And for everybody's thing, when we did original rules review and readoption, we had a stakeholder process in the beginning and stakeholders worked through it. And then those rules hit the pipeline for rules review and readoption. That's kind of the same process being used now, but the EMC is not being informed of what's going on. We don't know that these rules are started being negotiated among the stakeholders. We don't know what the sticking issues are. We don't know that there's markups yet. So I'm okay with whatever the different bodies, DEQ or Upper Neuse Basin or whatever stakeholders are out there in this process. But if rules are being negotiated or there's rough spots, I believe we should be informed as the rulemaking body. And I believe we should have the alternative to put one of our members into that process since it's an open stakeholder process. This is a public process. This is not a private process. And so I want to hear from John today first on this one, and we'll talk a little bit about our Pamlico rule update, because there's an issue there too that I believe the whole commission should be worried about or thinking about. So let me bring John up, and I've got Forrest Westall from Upper Neuse Basin Association. And I know he's got a handout prepared for you guys too, and I think John's got a handout for y'all. So John, if you'll have at it.
Good afternoon. Oh. Again, I'm John Heisman. I'm with the Division of Water Resources and the Non-Point Source Planning Branch. And as Chairman Solomon mentioned, I'm here today to give you an update on the Falls Lake rules readoption process. And then I guess at the end, I'll do the quick TARPAM update. And what's being passed out now is just a 2-pager handout that just kind of captures a little bit of what I covered last time when I came before to speak to you with an information item in January. On the handout, just have a little bit of background about the Falls Lake rules, just to refresh your memory that, these rules are in place. They are being implemented. They were implemented as of January 2011. And the whole goal of the Falls Lake rules is reducing nitrogen and phosphorus to Falls Lake. And we have an adaptive management component to the rules that allows for supplemental modeling to be done and additional information to be considered for readoption of the rules. The rules have been implemented in 2016 and 2018. There was legislation that set Falls Lake and Jordan Lake on their own rules readoption timeline. And the first aspect of that legislation directed that NC policy collaboratory to study both Jordan and Falls separately and develop recommendations and a report to come to this body in the General Assembly. And as a result of that legislation, the NC Policy Collaboratory did complete their study for Falls Lake and submitted that to you all and us back in December of 2023, which they're required to do. The second part of the legislation, directed the EMC in beginning the rules readoption process based on a couple conditions. One was receipt of that final report from the Policy Collaboratory and receipt of additional monitoring and modeling work that's submitted to the body or at least by December of 2024. So that's why when I came back to the January, I was kind of reporting on the status of those things, and where that's led to is the Upper Neuse River Basin Association, which represents all the local governments in the Falls watershed. They conducted an extensive monitoring project between 2014 and 2018, collecting additional water quality data throughout the watershed. And they used this data and along with DWR data on the lake to develop updated supplemental models for Falls Lake, both a watershed model and 3 additional lake models, including a statistical model. And those models have been submitted to DWR. Their final report on their data that they collected, they actually completed that in 2018. So the final report came in 2019, of June 2019. We received the watershed model and final report in December of 2023. And then the final Falls Lake model that included both a warmth model, an EFDC model, and a statistical model in the report was submitted to DWR back in December of 2024. So now we have the collaboratory the report, the UNRBA's monitoring information, watershed model, and the lake model all collected. So that's why when I came back to you all in January, I was giving you that update and letting you know that in addition to having all that information that will help inform the rulemaking process, we had begun discussions with the UNRBA and their member local governments and a few other people, like including agriculture interests and NCDOT and home builders, to start talking through rule ideas and rule concepts that, we, based on our lessons learned from the past 14 years of implementation and the data and modeling information collected by the UNRBA, to start coming up with ideas on rule revisions. And the whole idea is, like, if I misspoke at the last meeting, the intention here was to just engage stakeholders on the front end to get input. So as DWR and this body, as we report back to you, develops rules, we would have that input on the front end to hopefully smooth out the process so things go smoothly through the readoption and public input process that would obviously be the formal process when we go out to the public comment. So I was trying to stage things that were engaged in that upfront informal process of engaging with the UNRBA. They've been hosting a series of internal workshops, again, with their members inviting me, and I have been attending those meetings. But the intention was to work with them, hear their concerns, hear other stakeholder concerns, incorporate that back into DWR's drafting of the rules, and working on that timeline that's on the back sheet of the handout that was approved as part of that RRC process where Karen Higgins brought before you all the rules readoption schedules that you approved that went to the RRC. And the idea is that once we completed, the informal process, that the idea was to come to you all. And I think the way this schedule was laid out and approved was having us come back to the Water Quality Committee by May of 2026 with draft rules and an approved fiscal note for those rules, and then come back to the full EMC of July of 2026 to request permission to go out to public comment. And that would result in us coming back to May to the EMC of May of 2027 with those final rules after the public comment process. I understand that you were interested in seeing us evaluate additional expedited timelines that would happen quicker than that. So that's what that graphic on the bottom of the chart here. And just to orient you, the blue blocks, that's that original timeline I just mentioned that went to the RRC, coming to the Water Quality Committee in May of in May of 2026, and then the EMC in July of 2026. And then we looked at these two faster timelines that would involve less upfront interaction with stakeholders and probably a more concise, fiscal analysis process, because we would probably not have as much time to work on a fiscal analysis on an expedited timeline. So it would involve less changes to the rules that could be considered stringent. So the yellow there is showing a faster timeline that would bring us back to the Water Quality Committee in November of 2025, November of this year, and then the EMC in January of 2026. So, and then come back to the EMC in July of 2026 with the final rules for adoption. So instead of coming to Water Quality in May 2026, the faster timeline would have November of 2025. And then we looked at an even expedited timeframe where we almost make no changes that would require a fiscal note, just kind of moving through things much quicker. And that would have us coming back to the Water Quality Committee in September of 2025, in this body, November of 2025. So that's what this graph shows, is those expedient timeframes. And just again, to highlight the main difference between that original timeline and those expedient timelines would just be about when we basically stop the engagement with the stakeholders on the front end and drafting the rules and shortening the time frame we have for working on a fiscal note before we come back to the Water Quality Committee with those draft rules and an approved fiscal note if we were to need one.
Right. Okay. And I think just a couple things. One, we set the RRC schedules. We have the schedule here. We don't know if they're going to match the RRC schedule. I don't think the RRC or even this commission knew that those reports would be done on time. And so when the RRC schedule is set, there's probably a disconnect between the relationship of the timeliness of the data and the need for an adaptive management strategy and what we're doing here. So what I'm asking you guys is not to make it, I want you to be informed today, and we can work with the different parties to see if we can do an expedited schedule with what we've got, because we have the data and ready. Now, the other part about these upfront collaborative processes, they're really not binding. Ultimately, this body has to make the decisions. So if they get on friction points out there with transportation or developers or municipalities, they could spin around on this for the next, not a criticism, but they could spin around trying to negotiate this for 6 months or 8 months. And it still comes back to here, and those same parties are going to come to us and say, we don't agree with it. And we've still got to make the final decision. It's our rule. That's why I think in this kind of case, maybe we do need a member there, but we can make that later. I want to recognize Forrest Westall. He's a former EMC member. He's a director of UNRBA. He's got his own one-page handout that he wants to hand out, but and this isn't a one-upman game. There's just different perspectives here, and I've heard from a lot of people. A couple of things for y'all to see in here as he comes up. In the middle, you can see 4 meetings, 6 meetings, 4 meetings, 2 meetings. So they've been meeting. And if you look in the middle at all these different groups that are meeting, you can see why I get phone calls as chairman. because people are wanting to either move things or argue about things or something. But his final line at the very bottom is, we seek to see these rules readopted as soon as possible. So that's your last sentence here on this handout for us. It's being handed out.
That's my sentence.
So, huh?
That's my sentence. That's always my,
That's all. I know you've got a board and a body to represent,
That's
but
right.
that's where you're looking for. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of time, because you and John are collaborating here, but to give your perspective on this and what you think we should do, or is there something we should do differently than what we're doing?
Well, I appreciate it. Thank you, Chair and members of the commission. Appreciate John. He's been to all of our meetings. So all those meetings on there, John was there. So we appreciate that. You will see the list as the chair pointed out. We have a broad cross-section of the interested public, not just internal to the UNRBA and not just DWR, but we have environmental groups, we have conservation groups, we have DOT, we have agriculture. All of the folks that have components of the rules today are at the table as we discuss potential revision of those rules. So this is an expansive process. The work groups were to start the ball rolling on a more specific draft that would go to a larger set of folks. We're going to take it to our Path Forward Committee, which has staff members representing all 14 of our members, and then the Board of Directors, which is the 14 members. So the UNRBA is going to make a recommendation on the rules. My goal has always been, let's get on the same page. Let's don't have this. If we have this dissected process where we do something, DWR does something, and the commission does something, we'll be doing a bunch of back and forth. Let's get on the same page moving forward. Yes, we have some issues that are difficult. We'll have to work through those, and we are working through those. And the rules are going to be consistent with the objective of managing nutrients in this watershed. This is the only watershed in North Carolina that has a comprehensive nutrient management strategy in place. It's being implemented today. And for new development, for existing development, for wastewater treatment plants, for agriculture, and for DOT. So it's all being done right now. Our objective is to see that continue. You got our report of all the recommended consensus principles that the UNRBA recommended. Our organization is going to work toward that, but we are bringing in all the other different comments with DWR to try to synthesize a set of rules that will get some level of consensus moving forward. We won't always agree, and you can't make perfect rules. I have been through this process so many times it makes my head hurt, and going to rules adoption. And it takes a tremendous amount of time to do that. We're trying our best to get to the table the people most impacted by these rules, which are the local governments. They're bearing most of the cost. The estimate for the existing rules for stage 2, which hasn't been implemented yet, is $1 billion. That is a tremendous investment for local governments and people in the watershed to have to pay. So we have had a bunch of science. We've got the best science of any reservoir. So we want to use that science to make the rules fit the issue, not try to put a square peg in a round hole. We don't want to be trying to do things that are going to be costly but not very beneficial. So we're balancing that out, and I think we're on pretty close to a good page with DWR. We don't agree on everything, but I didn't really expect to. But we are moving that forward, and I appreciate the commission being engaged on this, because ultimately you're the body that does the rulemaking. You're the ones that do the rules review. You're the ones that passes them. There'll be a commission member or more that will be on the as a hearing officer. I served as a hearing officer on the original False Lake rules when I was on the commission, and there was a panel of 5 that did that. So we have some process ahead of us, but let's try to get to the root of the issue rather than letting the process drive this. Let's get the information we need, address the comments, and come up with a set of rules that'll have some level of consensus and not a lot of conflict, because conflict isn't going to get us to where we need to be.
Okay, very good. So my go-to point on this would be, if I had something to do, I don't think most of this commission, including the Water Quality Committee, knew all this was going on before today. So my point is, I want us to be better informed. I don't know why we haven't been better informed, but I want us to be better informed. And so my instinct would probably be to take somebody from the Water Quality Committee and put them as part of this process because you can see the number of stakeholders that are involved. And that way we can be informed and we can get ahead of some of these friction issues because we don't need back and forth between a bunch of stakeholders and DWQ or anything like that. We need to be seamless. And I think having somebody there would do that. So I don't think I need a motion for that. We can just include somebody there, but I did want to get insights around the table, who knew of all this and who didn't, and maybe any questions you've got or any concerns you've got from it's an information item from the course of action I'm kind of suggesting here. Mr. Smith?
Well, I guess my assumption had been based on previous presentations that in fact there would be stakeholder conversations going on between the department and interested parties in development of the rule. And I fully agree that stakeholder process can't be open-ended. It is possible, I've seen it happen, for them to spiral out of control. So there needs to be a timeline. But it's extremely valuable from my point of view for the commission to have some of these issues, if not resolved, at least thrashed out in a stakeholder discussion. So when it does come to the commission, we know where everybody is, we know what the friction points are and what remains to be resolved. So I don't necessarily disagree with assigning a commission member, but it is not my sense that this was a secret or something that should be surprising to EMC members, given the process that's been used all along.
Okay, very good. Other comments, information? We'll just move on to the next. Thank you, Forrest. Any other comments from your perspective, Forrest?
No, I appreciate it. And, but I will say that this is a very much different process than I've ever been involved with. Most of it has been driven by the agency. And this is being driven by the people being regulated. They are stepping up and taking responsibility for it and pushing for a good management strategy. You won't find that kind of commitment in any other watersheds, that level of commitment. Jordan One Water program is a great program, but they haven't moved through the rulemaking process at this point. The UNRBA is driving this, and it's the regulated community that's driving it. And I think that's an unusual aspect.
Thank you. John, anything else on this topic, or we want to move on to the next one, Pamela?
If I could, just to clarify, is there any feedback from you about the timeline that I discussed, or will that be like a future discussions? I just want to make sure I understood the direction moving forward.
I appreciate you giving us an advanced schedule. And so if we can make this go as quickly as feasible, I think Commissioner Smith's right. We don't want something to spin out of control. If you guys are having friction points, we'd like to know those up front, and we could probably give you some indicators as a commission or as Water Quality Committee, how we might break on that to help move things along. But you don't want to be in 8 or 12 meetings arguing about the same issue when we should be informed of it and maybe could give you some insights of how we may break on it. So that's really what I'm aiming at. And if we need to formally move the schedule up, we will. But really today was information so that this whole commission would be aware of both the good work that's being done and how we move this as quickly along as possible. So thank y'all both for that.
Thank you.
Okay, let me introduce Tarpamico for John. This is a rule package is on the table. Commissioner Baumgartner is the hearing officer here. I know John and Tim have had discussions on this recently as yesterday. I'll let them introduce it, but part of the Tarpamico package and some definitions, and I don't know all the details here, but we've had some comments come in that this may violate or put other rules in jeopardy or other basin association credit trading programs and some kind of potential quandary. And so I really wanted the whole commission to hear this because these rules are going to come back to the commission at some point. My hope here is that whatever discussions need to be worked out as a result of this issue, they get worked out before they come back to the commission, even if it means we have to wait several meetings to bring the rules back and others an MOA that we'll write a letter and try to extend, and we will extend. But really want this worked out ahead of time, but I do want the whole commission to hear this friction point on this rule. So John or Tim, either one.
So do we like, oh, sure. So just to refresh your memory, the TARPAM wastewater rule revisions were brought to you all in November for permission, requesting permission to go out to public comment. And that was approved. the rule went out to public comment, was noticed January 2nd. The public comment period went through March 3rd, so it just ended last Monday. We did hold one public hearing, February 6th down at Pitt County with our hearing officer, Commissioner Tim Baumgartner. And we have received 3 sets of comments, and I believe that the comments that you're referring to came to us from the Neuse River Compliance Association. And the main concern was the introduction of 3 definitions within our rule for allocation, active allocation limit and reserve allocation, and the fact that those terms appear within their permit. So we just had our first meeting with our hearing officer just to let him know that we're looking into this, and obviously we're going to work through this process as we would through our hearing officer process. And just to let you know about some actions that I'm taking as I've reached out to the Neuse River Compliance Association because I want to get some clarity on their comments. I've read through them several times. I'm not a lawyer. That looks like they were written by a lawyer, so I'm just trying to make sure we understand their concerns and what they made a recommendation that I didn't fully understand. And I've also followed up with our DEQ internal counsel to talk with them as well to get their insights. So I have every intention of following up and to work through this with our hearing officer so we can come back to you as soon as possible with that issue resolved.
Yeah, and I think their attorney is Dan McLawhorn, and Dan's very knowledgeable about the situation. So certainly, hopefully all the councils can get together and talk about these issues before we bring it back. It's important because that MOA does expire in July, and we had talked about this taking a long time to get worked out with that association. And Commissioner Keenan and I worked on that to try to get them to the table and get it through. But we are going to be tight. But I don't think this commission will want to rush it and jeopardize other programs. And if it spills over into September or November, we can extend that MOA or try to without causing damage to other programs. We need to understand it first, and we may come back in May and everything's hunky-dory. But this commission needs to be aware of what we may be facing with the MOA in July. Tim?
Yeah, John covered it well. The issue deals with 3 terms that are related to allocation, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
So review by council, review by the commenting agency will probably get us to where we need to be. It seems like these terms are in other parts of the rule that maybe are not in the Neuse rule itself. So how that consistency plays off the other rules, does it need to be in the overarching, does those terms need to be in the overarching rule for all 3 of these separate rules, the Jordan Falls and the Neuse? No, Jordan Falls, Tarpam. We're talking about Tarpam, sorry. Does some of that need to be moved up in the rules to be identified, things that John's vetting out with council, and we'll come back to a resolution?
Which would mean if we adopt this rule, we got to go change another rule, but it wouldn't be changed till after this rule was adopted, or we hold this rule up so we don't create confusion somewhere else.
That may be a possibility.
Yeah.
We just have to get clarification, try to get a path forward.
Okay.
But
Don, you good?
Yes.
Questions? Any more questions from commissioners on this topic? It's really just a briefing and an update. Okay. Next topic is Hurricane Helene update. I know Commissioner Deerhay, go ahead, please.
I just thought I would take this opportunity to say that I think it's been years since we've had a report on Jordan, and it would be helpful to hear what the progress, if any, is on that. I know the staff has had a shortage over the last 2 or 3 years, but I think the commission would find it useful to know where things stand on Jordan.
I will add it to my list, and I have 4 things on nutrients that I ask, at least 3 that I ask Ms. Higgins to make sure we have information items in coming meetings. So we'll be discussing those, and we'll add Jordan, not just an overview, but a specific Jordan briefing that we would need as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Okay, so we're going to be doing Hurricane Helene updates probably at the next couple of meetings, probably through the rest of this year. I've heard several of you want that. Today, Shaddy's coming over from the Division of Water Infrastructure. He's going to talk a little bit about funding. I've asked him to make sure he keeps it brief, and he is. We've known each other a very long time, even when I was on SWIA and he was over at UNC. We worked together quite a bit there. We've worked a bit, but he'll be brief, and I really want this to open up time for questions with him about state funding streams and what other things we can do. So Shaddy?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you so much, Commissioners. My name is Shadi Escap, Director of Division of Water Infrastructure. I'm happy to present to you about funding for Hurricane Helene, Tropical Storm Helene, depends on which agency you talk to. I have 2 slides. So we'll definitely leave time for people to ask questions. Figure it's easier to just have the basics on the slides and then open up for questions. Back in October, as soon as the hurricane happened, we were sitting in meetings with the Emergency Operations Center and talking to NC Water Warren, to DWR, to FEMA, to emergency management, figure out where are the problems with drinking water, wastewater. We, as a division of water infrastructure, we have some revolving emergency loan funds. It's a small amount. So we immediately made that available. We contacted 20 local governments that we knew had their drinking water or their wastewater systems either completely non-operational or partially non-operational. So we prioritized them. We said, we've got a little bit of funding available for emergency loans through an existing program. Are you interested? Some of them were interested, but they were just dealing with the immediate aftermath. A couple of weeks later, Session Law 2024-53 came out. So this is mid-October, where the General Assembly allocated $100 million to DEQ, to our division, to use as an emergency bridge loan funding for communities out west. And the way this bridge loan, this is really a kind of a new way of doing funding for our division. So we completely changed how we were trying to provide funding to communities. And we cut as many steps as we could, and we try to expedite access to the funds as quickly as possible. The bridge loan is unique. It's all designed in the session law. And there are certain elements in there that's just different than what we normally do even for our other emergency loans. The bridge loan is designed as a way to provide access to funding to communities while they are working to receive FEMA public assistance funding or other types of federal disaster relief. So we would provide faster access to the cash so they can pay their contractors, they can do the work they need to do while they're working on getting the FEMA public assistance or other federal assistance reimbursements. And if they get those reimbursements, they can then use those reimbursements to pay back the loans to us. So it's a bridge. The bridge loans, according to the session law, they're set at 0% interest, which is great. They are loans. There's no grants in this. The closing fee, we usually have a 1.5% or 2% closing fee. That's been waived by the Secretary of DEQ. We had the authority to do that in that session law. Also in the session law, these loans do not require local government commission approval, which is also a unique thing. Usually when we have any kinds of loans going to any local governments, LGC would have to review the financials of the local governments and review and approve a loan before the local governments can access the loans. This is a special case where the loans are being provided without the LGC review and approval. The funds can be expended through October 2028, and the loans mature by June 2030. So these are short-term loans. These are 5-year, right now it's about 5-year loans. We've told the local governments that we'll provide the loans and we're not going to put them on any kind of amortization schedule. Just repay before June 2030, or whenever you receive the federal assistance that will reimburse you for these loans. And that's consistent with the way that the session law was structured. We worked to prioritize the funding. So it's 100 million. The needs are greater than 100 million across the region. We worked to try to prioritize those, again, communities that were either non-operational or partially non-operational. So we invited them to apply first. We initially told everybody they have up to $3 million that all they have to do is just send us a 1-page application form and just a very brief information. What's been damaged? What do they want to fix? You don't need to know the scope of your work. You're still working with your consultants. We'll figure that piece out. We just want to obligate the funds to you, and then you can work with your consultants to figure out the scope and send us your scope of work and revise the scope of work as you move forward with the project. So it's a little bit different where you don't need to know what your project is before you apply for the funds. Apply for the funds first, we'll secure the funds, and then we'll work with you to figure out what you're going to be doing with these funds, as long as they're consistent with the session law. Since then, we've also gotten other local governments from the Western North Carolina region requesting these funds as well. We've made those funds available to everybody that's applied for these funds so far. So as of yesterday, we have 22 local governments in Western North Carolina that have a bridge loan offer from us as well, and a couple that have requested increases to the original bridge loan. So we have up to $3 million to ask for, and then if they submit a scope of work with a revised budget, we can increase the funding offer to them. So in the table on the right, you can see the local governments that currently have an emergency bridge loan. We still have some funds available to commit to other local governments in the region, but I also want to talk about what's coming down the line from the federal side. So we're working with EPA closely on future funding we're anticipating for Western North Carolina. This is coming from the American Relief Act 2025. So this was back in December 2024 when Congress appropriated additional funding for multiple natural disasters in multiple areas of the country, of which Hurricane Helene is one. And there are 3 separate pots of funding that's coming down through EPA that we are talking to EPA about how to access those funds. They're not currently available. The allotments for North Carolina have not been announced. So the way this normally works is Congress would appropriate a top line dollar amount. EPA will get that and then allocate it to the different states based on methodologies that they use. And they'll announce to the states how much we could apply for. And then our department, our division will apply to EPA to receive those funds. And then we would have subrecipients. We have local governments that apply to us to get those funds as well. So we don't yet know what North Carolina's allotments are. We're expecting that any day now. Hopefully any day now. I know the potential federal shutdown that might delay some things. So the 3 pots of funds that we're expecting, there's a $3 billion Clean Water State Revolving Fund and Drinking Water State Revolving Funds appropriation for multiple regions, multiple states, of which North Carolina would get a portion of that. That will be for drinking water and wastewater repairs, recovery, and adding in flood resiliency to infrastructure in Western North Carolina in the affected areas. These are loans. The Drinking Water SRF and the Clean Water SRF are loan funds, of which a portion can be forgiven, could be what we call principal forgiveness loans. At least 30% of whatever is coming to North Carolina will be used or will be principal forgiveness. The rest will be loans, but we do have the option to go higher than that. There's a second pot, which is new. Actually, the next 2 are relatively new things for EPA and for us. We're excited about both of them. The second one, the $85 million appropriated nationally through the Clean Water State Revolving Funds to help with decentralized wastewater treatment systems out west, especially in North Carolina. There's a lot of systems, a lot of communities are on septic systems or other types of decentralized, and there's not a lot of funding available to help the communities rebuild and repair the damages to septic systems. So that's a new funding source that's coming to us, and we've been talking to EPA about what that might look like. The last one is $60 million to address water emergencies. It's kind of, there's only ever been one recipient nationally for that type of funding. It's called Section 1442B from the Safe Drinking Water Act. It's funding not for capital projects, but for operations and maintenance. So it's new to EPA. It's new to us. We're trying to figure out what that means. It's more like technical assistance, try to provide assistance to towns to address Hurricane Helene recovery, but not on the capital infrastructure side. So we're waiting to see what is going to be considered allowable in terms of how those funds can be used. But we're excited about that because we know a lot of local governments, it's not just capital, but they also have a lot of operational and managerial capacity needs to help with the recovery efforts as well. And this potentially would be helping that. The 3 pots that I mentioned here are all coming through EPA. There are, of course, other federal agencies that received appropriations, USDA, Economic Development Administration, Housing Urban Development as well. And so there are other federal funding coming to the state. But I'm here to talk about the EPA funding. Those are my 2 slides. So pause here to see if there are any questions.
Questions?
Not a question, but just a comment. That second or third line says North Carolina's allotments have not yet been announced. That is an absolute fact. You can't find money for nothing right now. The other piece of it that I'd like to comment on and mention yesterday, all that money is going to be impacted by one law called no-rise floodplain rules. There's eventually, will you put money into this for our water and sewer projects? If they're with the no-rise rules, they may not be able to put these back. That could really be a huge hindrance. Those are county. It's really the lower level people that's going to have to sign off on those things, and they're not going to do it because they're scared to death to do it. So I'll make that comment, and it's going to be something that somebody needs to deal with and deal with it fast.
No-rise studies can take a year or more to do, and then it's got to go through local approval. And so by the time you get it done, even if you could do it, it may take quite a bit of time for the recovery to even happen.
Incredibly expensive as well. Not many people know how to do them, and my contention is there's not a single line up there that the FEMA floodplain rules are completely gone now.
Well, I know you pushed to do it after the fact to let people rebuild where they were, and then after the fact decide whether they violated any additional no-rise situations.
That and the other thing, this is an anomaly. Are you going to make this your standard and your benchmark of Helene? Most of these are going to be 7 to 10 feet differences in those elevation differences. That's a huge thing. So I'm not sure, even though everybody's promising money, I haven't seen any yet, and I've been trying to get some for a lot of different reasons. But you start looking at these rules, especially no-rise, I don't know what you can do with that. So just comment.
Thank you, sir. Commissioner Ellison, question?
Yeah, on your $100 million in state loans, is that a set amount, or as payment may come in, can that money be reavailable? Okay.
Yeah, so we have until October 2028 to expend the funds. Anything that's not been expended from us or encumbered by us will have to go back to the state. But until then, if we're loaning out the funds and they get reimbursed and they repay us back sooner than that, we can turn around and use the funds to loan back out to others all the way through 2028. After that point, it goes back to the state.
And how much is still currently available?
I think, if I remember correctly, we've obligated 63 million out of the 100 million, so we still have a little bit left. Some of those that have emergency loans are still working out what their budgets are. So they've asked for the initial 3 million or whatever they knew at the time. But as they're working with the consultants, they're coming up with a more complete scope within a revised budget. So some of them may actually ask for increases. We've had 2 so far that asked for increases. I'm expecting more of those. But there's still funds available for other local governments. And then we've still got the original revolving emergency loans that I mentioned at first we were offering. We can always use those funds as well if we obligate all 100 million, and there's need for more.
Are there restrictions on what the funds can, well, I'm sure there are, but is it specifically for design and construction of emergency repairs?
So the emergency loans are it's for assessments, design, repair the damage, pre-hurricane level, with any modifications you need to make the project workable and add resilience to it. So you can't it's not any type of infrastructure project. You have to rebuild because you're recovering from Hurricane Helene, but you can also rebuild in a way to make it more flood resilient into the future. We also, I should have also mentioned this, we're also providing for some of the local governments that have received emergency loans with us. If they are a small local government, we've added in $200,000 of technical assistance grant funds that they can use to pay for the design and evaluation side as well. So they can use the grant money to help with the pre-construction work and then start using the loan money. So we're trying to provide easy access to the best available funding that we have to help systems use the funds as quickly as possible while they're working out other federal relief, disaster relief. We are planning to look at the SRF funds that are coming down to figure out how we can marry those SRF funds with the emergency loans. What's the best approach? Because the SRF funds are usually 20-year loans as opposed to a 5-year loan. And some of the local governments are a little bit concerned about, some of these are very small towns, even taking a 5-year loan at 0% interest, even if it's 2 million or 3 million, it's very difficult for them to repay that loan unless they know for sure there's another source of revenue coming in to help reimburse them for those loans.
Thank you, and I would commend you on the efficiency and thoroughness of your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Derrick.
I'm just curious. I mean, I'd heard reports about the extensive damage to treatment plants, but were any of these completely destroyed and starting over from scratch? And if that's the case, is this money really enough to help?
So there's definitely greater need than the 100 million across the region. I guess the 100 million is, again, was an immediate short-term effort to get something moving quickly until other federal sources will be made available. In some situations, the damage is pretty extensive, and 3 million would not be enough for them to rebuild.
So, I mean, do all of those have some small portion, at least, of the plant that can be recovered, or are they just completely washed out?
I might ask for a little bit of help from water resources as well, but there are some some of those that were non-operational are partially operational now, and there are some situations where package plants might be used temporarily. They are all working. They're not just working with us. They are working with FEMA and emergency management and other agencies as well to try to recover as best they could.
Mr. Yarborough.
Yeah, I commend the department. It's been amazing what you've done with water and sewer. I mean, it was so critical. The other piece of it, make sure everybody understands that this is what that money there that you're offering is huge, because this was reimbursements. So these little towns had no money, or what little bit of the money that they had for operating and their piggy bank was just overwhelmed. So that bridge loan made a huge impact on most of the communities I'm aware. And I imagine that Forrest, is he still here? His community was totally destroyed. I mean, there's nothing there. So it's reimbursement. FEMA has to be, eventually they'll pay, but this bridge loan is what is going to be critical to them. So I commend you for that, and the department. It's just unbelievable what they did and got back up there and started making it work. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Ellison.
There are in the West, there are some private companies that provide wastewater treatment. Will any of these funds be available? Not necessarily from this program, but are there funds available to help them?
So unfortunately, there's less funding resources available for the privately owned systems. When we receive the EPA funds, the investor-owned drinking water systems are eligible for the drinking water state revolving funds. They're not eligible for the 100 million emergency loans. Privately owned wastewater systems is a little more difficult. So one of the things that we've been talking to EPA, we've been bringing this up to EPA about making that allowable for some of these funds that are coming down the line. So we're hoping to see that the SRF funds or maybe out of the 60 million water emergency funding, potentially some of this could be used for privately owned systems as well. We've made that clear to EPA that is a need, and there isn't really a good source of funding elsewhere.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Shawty, one last thing, and this, I guess, is mine from back in the day, right? Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Gibson.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, like, how many outstanding applications do you still have that you guys have to review, if any, none?
None.
That's
We
great.
prioritize, we've told everybody that as soon as we get Hurricane Helene anything, whether it's an application or a disbursement request, they go top of the line. So they are cutting lines. So we usually process, I mean, the latest one, the 22nd loan, we received that application last week, and within a few days, they have a loan already executed and it's with them. So we don't have any in-house that we haven't processed yet.
Back in the day, we used to fret about, we had certain communities that liked the program and certain communities that didn't, and we were always trying to move the numbers up. And with the asset management grant, the regionalization grants, try to hook more people in and get them doing. Are you getting a lot of new customers, so to speak, coming to your program as a result of Helene, or is it the same people that have kind of been using the program all along? Because there's a trust factor there, right? If you don't know the program, you don't sign up. Any comment on that, or?
Maybe not so much Helene, more so the past 3 years because of all the funding that we've had with ARPA funds, as well as all of the IIJA funds, and the Viable Utilities reserve and the valuable utilities program has been up and running, and we're gathering steam with that. So I think that we've definitely seen a lot more applicants, a lot more communities applying for funding to us than ever before. The last 3 or 4 years, we've seen $3 billion worth of requests in every funding round. And we've only been able to fund about 10 to 20% of all the requests coming in. So I think that because of all the funding that we've had recently, we've gotten a lot of applications, a lot of communities coming to us. The asset inventory assessments are still very, very attractive. We get a lot of applications for those. The merger realization we get, depends on the funding year sometimes. But there is a lot of interest, and we are looking at some of the additional, we have a little bit of grant funds available, how we can use that to help look at regionalization options out west as well. So while you're out there recovering and rebuilding, if there's a regional option that might help communities, we're willing to put in some grant money to help them assess that and make that part of their recovery efforts.
Very good. Well, thank you for coming today. As Commissioner Ellison said, we appreciate the efficiency and conciseness of the presentation.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Let's move on now to staff or directors' reports. And I don't see Toby there, but we'll let Dimler lead off. And as Toby told you, efficiency is always good. Five bullets is always great, and I think you've got a handout that you've presented already. So
5 or fewer.
Toby
Five or fewer. We
Toby
can,
put these
we can
together.
read.
Y'all
Yep.
know how he is, so I'll try to.
All right.
I'm Adam Park. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, Commissioners. I've got 3 updates to provide. One for the dam safety program, stormwater program, and then the rules for your adoption process. So the Demler has worked with its consultant in development and updated statewide probable maximum precipitation study, which has been under development since spring of 2024. It did add the storms from last year, and we expect to be able to publish this tool on track in April of 2025. The dam safety program has also been working with the Association of State Dam Safety Officials to complete a peer review of the program. And we look forward to receiving our program review from other dam safety experts to understand how we compare with other similar programs in other states and to review any recommendations made to assist with program growth and improvement. The stormwater program, Demler staff has been working with IT in developing our Access DEQ conversion from Laserfish for both the MPDS construction stormwater and post-construction stormwater application and compliance process. Plan to have the construction stormwater process online later this month. The NPDS program has also 2 industrial general permits that expire at the end of June. Those 2 NPDS permits are the NCG02 for mining activities and the NCG19 for marinas and shipbuilding. And then finally, at the last meeting, you approved the rules readoption schedule for both dam safety and stormwater rules. We're currently developing a stakeholder group for the dam safety rules, and we'll forward that list to the Chairman Solomon for his review and concurrence by the end of the month.
Thank you. Any questions? Very good. Nice job. Don't tell Toby you did it better, okay? All right, Michael Scott.
Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission. A few updates this morning. Do want to thank all of our valued colleagues working on the Helene response, kind of dovetailing into Shadi's comments. Our solid waste programs approved over 123 temporary disaster debris sites. As we've mentioned to this commission, over 90 of these are brand new sites for debris management in western North Carolina. So a huge endeavor there. Almost 6 million cubic yards of right-of-way debris have been removed and processed thus far based on weekly emergency management updates that we're receiving on the state's pre-positioned contractors. In addition to debris, we're also working on a bridge loan program. Like Shadi mentioned, the General Assembly dedicated $22 million to a UST bridge loan program to assist gas station operators in the western part of the state that have been impacted by the Helene floodwaters. So we've been actively working to get information out. The past few weeks, we've recently sent out loans to gas station operators to replace dispensers, make repairs, do certain line testing, and continue to try to support that part of our permitted stakeholders regarding the gas station operators. On the rulemaking front, we've been busy with rulemaking. The UST Bridge Loan Program did come with emergency rules that we had to draft. The Secretary signed those into effect in addition to finalizing the solar decommissioning rules, which will be heard before the Rules Review Commission later this month. So appreciate all the colleagues, Adam, who spoke yesterday at the Groundwater Committee, Jessica Monty, and so many others who have been instrumental on those different rule development fronts. A lot going on in the world of PFAS. We did send out a press release on Monday regarding Chemours expanded well sampling efforts. They have sent out approximately 150,000 letters to residents in now Harnett and Hope counties, Cumberland, Robeson, Sampson, and Bladen counties regarding an expanded region of private well sampling that will be offered. These 150,000 letters seek initial information on whether the properties are served by municipal water or private well water. If they are served by private well water, then those properties will be eligible for sampling by Chemours contractors. So once again, 150,000 unique properties, expansion of the sampling range outwards of 14 miles from where the last sampling was occurring. We're now up into the lower parts of Harnett County, meaning Bun Level, Irwin, parts of Hope County, and farther south in areas of Bladen and Robeson counties. So a lot of work yet to come on that particular front. This is coupled with some additional PFAS private well sampling initiated by EPA and the Army. So the EPA and Army are teaming up to sample private wells around Fort Bragg. Those letters also went out this week to about 50 property owners regarding potential PFAS from that military installation and the need to sample groundwater. So a lot going on in that particular area, central part of the state for sure. And the last item, we continue to have multiple programs working on the former Pactiv site, now owned by Mr. Spiritas in Canton, North Carolina. The site has come into our brownfields program, proposing some different redevelopment options for that former paper mill. And then our Superfund program is also continuing to work with EPA on some of the existing environmental impacts at that site. That's it. Thank you.
Questions for Director Scott? Thank you very much. Director Rogers, of course, come on.
He was going to jump up before.
He stays up here anyway. It seems like he's up here all the time.
Yeah, that's why I'm not going to spend much time up here right now. Mr. Chair,
Thanks,
Commissioners.
I appreciate that.
Most of my comments were in the director's report and update. I do want to, as being current director for the Division of Water Resources, also send our condolences and best wishes to Steve Tedder's family. Steve worked in the division for a career here at the state and did a fantastic job. Steve was not the most easy person to get along with sometimes, but one thing you knew is that his priority was protecting water quality, and he carried out that very well. Commissioner Deerhake mentioned the Salisbury intake. Steve was all over that. He hung up around the director's office for several days, waiting for Julie Gribb to show up. He didn't make an appointment. He just showed up, and he talked to me some. And I said, I said, I need to talk to Julie. He did. They went in her office and raised voices, I don't know, for 30 minutes, 45 minutes. And I listened a little bit. He left, and I went over to Joe and said, how did it go? He said, it went fine. So that was Steve, and he advocates his positions and did a great job. So our thoughts are with him, with his family during this time as well. I do want to mention two cohorts of mine, Julie and Michael, have not been here. They have some personal reasons that they could not be here. Believe you me, they wanted to be here, and I definitely wanted them here. But Michael, Pachetra's wife, went into open heart surgery yesterday, and she's doing well. Just want to let you know that. And Julie's taking care of some family matters as well. So please keep them in your thoughts. Helene updates. Water treatment, wastewater treatment facilities that we're focused on are in the update. They are detailed comments, just to let y'all know there's a lot of work going on. Our folks in the region are focused on helping them. They're communicating them on a regular basis. They're going by inspecting, but helping them identify problems and supporting them in their efforts. We've also recognized, because of those efforts and our work with those wastewater treatment plants, especially, that we will not make our inspection requirements for EPA this year, which we have communicated with them that we're going to be short. And we don't plan to make it because we're trying to focus on the facilities in need. So we are working on that as well, and we'll continue to work with those systems as they recover. That is my comments. Be glad to take any
Question for
questions.
Director Rogers, yes.
No, it's not a question, but I just want to second but what Commissioner Rogers said about Steve and the Salisbury project, because if you recall, in early stages, there was some question and even maybe some controversy over that whole project. I don't know what he said to Julie, and I wasn't involved at that stage. I only got involved later to substitute as hearing officer, but I can tell you it was worked out, because that was one of the smoothest, easiest public hearings I've ever seen. It went right through. We had the riverkeeper supporting it. So whatever he did it well.
Very good. Okay, thank you very much. Oh, Commissioner Gibson.
Yeah, I was interested to see in your summaries that dissolved air flotation is being used. It's been a long time since I had my water and wastewater engineering design classes, but that in the past was used for wastewater mainly. So I'm just wondering, are these modular units kind of like high throughput, or?
I will follow up with you on that.
Mr. Smith.
I have a question as my microphone. Question about the Town of Ashborough's 1,4-dioxane releases, which did not appear in your report, but a news release that the department put out in January indicated that the concentrations of 1,4-dioxane in the city's wastewater discharge had really shot up since the 1,4-dioxane conditions were removed from their NPDES permit in response to the administrative law judge's decision. And in looking at the data that's on the DWR website, for most of 2024, when that condition was in place, the concentration varied within a range of about 45 to 100 parts per billion. The January results were 3,250 parts per billion as measured by the city, and over 2,000 parts per billion in the state's samples. That is a huge increase in response to removal of that permit condition. And so my question is, do you know what caused that huge increase? What changed?
What we have found out is that they were taking the system down that they were treating. This is StarPet, which is an SIU to Ashborough, taking that treatment system down. And it reduced their treatment of 1,4-dioxane. Obviously, they need to put in a basin to collect that when they're doing this treatment. It went on a little longer than we anticipated. We just checked, and the latest numbers are around 75 parts. So it's coming down. And the latest report we have is coming down. But they were in the process of cleaning and updating their treatment facility for the 1,4-dioxane at StarPet.
So one follow-up question about that. Are there no requirements to have an interim plan in place during that kind of process?
There should be, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. Okay, let's move on to air quality.
All right, good morning. I'm Taylor Hartsfield, Deputy Director, filling in from Director Mike Abrazinskis. So some Hurricane Helene updates. The Division of Air Quality has been working to provide regulatory relief for communities impacted by Hurricane Helene, while encouraging best practices for storm debris removal and limit those impacts on air quality. So recently on March 3rd, the division requested an extension of US EPA's issued no action assurance for the use of air curtain incinerators to manage vegetative debris without first obtaining a Title V permit. So this action will help to facilitate efficient and safe processing of vegetative debris without requiring that necessary permitting. So we actually just received late yesterday afternoon the approval of that no action assurance from EPA. So that extension has been, or the no action assurance extension is now in effect through September 1st of this year. Our additional non-regulatory fine particulate monitoring continues in Western North Carolina, much of which is occurring with equipment that has been received on loan from US EPA. The data from that monitoring, again, can be seen on EPA's fire and smoke map, or you can contact our division directly. Moving off of Hurricane Helene into some EPA news, Kevin J. McUmber has been appointed to serve as the regional administrator for EPA Region 4. And we've provided a link to the press release and his biography in the notes. And Aaron Szabo has been nominated to serve as the assistant administrator of US EPA's Office of Air and Radiation. Szabo previously served over 10 years in the federal government at the White House Council on Environmental Quality, the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, and the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And that's all for me.
Thank you, Taylor. Very good.
Any questions?
Questions? All right.
All right,
Hearing
thank
none,
you.
that's wonderful. Again, I want to commend the directors. I know you're at the end of this sometimes and we try to be concise, but the written comments, those directors' reports are invaluable, not just for us, but for the public. I think it gives a really good snapshot and a summary for everybody about what's going on inside the division. So I know it takes a little bit of time to put those together, but they're very much appreciated. And we appreciate them being posted for the public to see in addition to us. So thank you. Let's go around for a few minutes. I think most of us, we had really good attendance at the committee meetings yesterday, so I don't know that you need to beat them to death, but Bill, I'll start with you, Commissioner Yarborough, and any comments you have personally or any updates you want to give us on your committee from yesterday.
I think I talked enough.
Okay, Commissioner Tweedy?
Just continued thanks to the staff, to me personally for the help you give me, and then the help to the commission. That's all.
Commissioner Smith, anything from water allocation yesterday or anything individually?
So Water Allocation Committee had a couple of information items, so there was no action. But one of those information items I thought was particularly helpful in describing the history of the Catawba Watery Water Management Group, which was created during the last FERC relicensing on the Catawba River to provide a way to negotiate agreements about water use in a basin that spans North Carolina and South Carolina. So that was a very helpful presentation. It's a good reminder that there are folks out there doing ongoing work. They are still meeting and they intersect with our interbasin transfer request and how those are negotiated in the Catawba River Basin. So that was very informative. There was not much new news on the interbasin transfer requests that are pending. So that was the other information item. In terms of personal comments, I have some concerns about how our rulemaking process is working these days. And I'll tell you, in yesterday's Water Quality Committee meeting, Division of Water Resources staff was required to stand up and present a rule draft for PFAS that did not represent either the division's recommendations or the input that they had received from conversations with other interested parties. In fact, the committee never even heard about feedback from interested parties. In fact, the rule draft was derived from a framework provided by the North Carolina Water Quality Association, which is one interested party. It was not identified as such in the meeting. Staff was left to answer questions about it. And again, was not given the opportunity to make a broader presentation on either the rule or the feedback they had received from other interested parties. And I find that really problematic. I think it's unfair to the staff to put them in that position. I think it's a bad practice to outsource our rule development work to a single special interest group. The Water Quality Association has a very legitimate interest in this issue, and they should be heard from. But we use our staff as a way to develop a rule draft and gather input from other interested parties and then bring that back to the committee and then the commission. So in the interest of fairness and transparency, if this is ever going to happen again, I would hope that the chair and the committee chair would make it clear what the origin of the draft was and have the appropriate person answering the questions instead of putting the staff in that position. That is not, again, fair to the staff. It's not transparent in terms of what commission members know about the origin of a draft, what the public knows. And in fact, apparently, some committee members received copies of the Water Quality Association's proposal, but not all committee members did. That's just not a good practice for public policy development and rulemaking.
Okay, thank you. And I won't get defensive about that, but I'll just say that we were early in the process and we met in January. And specifically, I asked them after our last meeting to give us their best opinion, staff. And this is something we got to be united about. So I'm not trying to be divisive here. I'm not trying to set one against the other. But I asked them, you've always been our expert. We want you to give me two of yours and give me two from wherever you want to, that you've done before or other places, and bring them back to us and give us some options. And that's what the request was. When water quality, when the pre-treatment people came to the table, and those are our partners, they're like in the stormwater program, they're the people we delegate to. So they're the people who have to administer it. And we're not trying to put additional burden on them to the extent practical. They came to us with their version. And we were told by staff, this is about 80% right. I'm not going to speak for staff, and I want this to be a unified process. We never got the staff's opinion of a rule, whether it be from Michigan, whether it be from Arizona, whether it be something else. Their opinion, their expertise was never shown except to try to add on to what the pretreatment people gave us. And so when we had our February meeting scratched, it was like, let's use that one because we haven't seen anything else. And we'll move forward with that one with the staff's comments on top of that. And that's exactly what we did in the March meeting. So I'm not defensive about it. I think it's unified. We're going to work through this. DEQ and staff, DEQ and EMC are going to work through this. But there's a lot of things that have gone on behind the scenes that I'll be glad to talk off. But tit for tat's not going to get us anywhere. We got to get the rule done. And so I appreciate your comments, and I don't take defensiveness to them. And I understand the points you're making. So thank you. Commissioner Gibson, comments on your front?
Nothing for me. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Commissioner King, if you can be brief on your committee report. We had a long meeting, but audibly brief, and any other personal comments you have.
Yes, just on the report from yesterday, we had a first action item presentation for approval to move to the EMC with proposed amendments for laboratory certification rule 15A NCAC 02H 0804 to add additional parameters. That additional parameter was for total nitrogen. That was a request from the North Carolina Department of Ag, Consumer Services Division. Just a more direct analytical method to use using total nitrogen. So that will be coming before you. The second action item, and I'll just put these two together. The second and third action item was the PFAS and the 1.4. As you know, the committee, just to remind the committee that that was pulled off the Trina review to look at that in March of last year, to look at that as going forward and pulling that out individually. And so we pulled that back out, and both of those motions on the floor yesterday was to direct the EQ staff to complete the PFAS and the 1.4 dioxin rule as discussed yesterday, and develop the associated regulatory impact analysis for approval at the May 2025 Water Quality Committee meeting. So we'll be expecting that from the department regulatory impact analysis in May
Okay.
for the rule. PFAS and 1.4.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Commissioner Duggan, Vice Chair, I'll get you, you've had some work emergencies while you've been sitting here, so thank you very much for being here with us and having a good fight here.
I appreciate the time. I'd like to, of course, as always, thank Paula and Lois for all the work that they do and keeping us in line here. So I appreciate that. I also, while I don't serve on the Water Quality Committee, I sat through the meetings as I did all the other committee meetings yesterday. I do appreciate staff's position in this, and I look forward to seeing the proposed rules that staff will bring to the Water Quality Committee. And again, I don't serve on that committee, but I'm anxious to see those rules. And again, I appreciate all the staff does and the department does for the state. So thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Ellison.
I'll pass at this time, lacking your diplomatic skills.
Commissioner Deerhake. Commissioner Carter, committee update and any other comments you've got?
Yes, sir. Well, the committee had several items, two listed action items, both to proceed to the commission, which will be done in May on for hearing, to go to hearing and notice hearing on proposed rule revisions for air curtain incinerators and air curtain burners. The second one on periodic review of rules under 2D and 2Q. Those were passed unanimously. There was a third item that was listed as an update, but it was actually, and I intended, and we did take it as an action item. It was listed as an update on a letter to go to EPA relative to the session laws relating to pre-permitting provisions of the rules. Now, we had an extensive discussion, and the department originally had proposed to sign that letter and send it before this meeting, the meetings yesterday, and I insisted that it had to come unsigned to the committee yesterday for the committee to review, and as if we were satisfied with it, to sign off on it. As it turned out, after the discussion, there were some serious issues there, including the fact that the letter was requesting that the EPA incorporate the provisions of the session laws into the state implementation plan by letter approval. Well, that's simply not, that's not done. That's not how you modify a SIP. It's done by rulemaking. So that was problematic to start with. And after the extensive discussion, it was quite clear the committee was not satisfied to send this letter forward. And in fact, no motion was even offered. When I asked for a motion, there was silence in the room. Then I want to thank Commissioner Smith, who rescued us with the motion that was needed, and it was adopted unanimously, which was to do a very simplified rulemaking because of the proviso in the Administrative Procedure Act that you don't adopt into rules the exact text of the statute. So we can't do that anyway, but we're going to do a simplified rulemaking to effectively incorporate those into the SIP. And I think that's exactly the way to go. And so I want to thank her again for coming forward with that. And the second piece of her motion, in which we will be following up on as well, was to inform the General Assembly about the problem related to the session laws, which had a July 1 deadline in it for submission to EPA. And it was repeatedly told to me that that was the reason for this letter. It had to be done to satisfy that July 1 date. So that wasn't going to be accomplished because the letter wasn't going to go forward once the committee wasn't satisfied with it. After we adopted the motion, I adjourned the meeting, and I turned to Director Abrazinskis and said, look, we tried, Mike. I know you needed that for the July 1 deadline. And his response to me was, no, we didn't need that letter for the July 1 deadline. We already satisfied that with the letter we sent them in September. Now, I don't know what was going on there. I don't even know why this letter came forward now, because it was represented to me many times by him and others that they had to send that letter to meet that session law deadline. That was, I'll call it a fabrication. I won't call it an outright lie, but I don't know what else to call it absolutely at this point. And I was so astonished when he told me that, I didn't even ask the next question. But then why were we doing this? I expect an answer, by the way, from the department on that. The other piece of the problem here was that they believed, for reasons that I won't go into, and I'm going to wander through the statutory issue, that they could send this letter forward without any bringing it to the commission or the commission having any role in it, even though they were requesting a SIP revision. That's just not correct. It's not proper, and so on. I don't know if there's a problem at the department with some of the new management not understanding how this commission and the department interact or what. But I think we need to get past that, and they need to understand fully the role of this commission. And it is the rule. We are the rulemaking body for the air, water, and waste programs. And if anything relates to those rules and those regulatory programs, they has to go through this commission. And the other thing that I will point out very directly is something that came out of the litigation last year over the 1,4-dioxane rules, and it was filed against this commission, all individual members, was came out very clearly, and I'll give a nod to the Department of Justice for this because they brought it up. The general statutes make that absolutely clear that this commission does not report to the governor. We don't report to the department. We are an independent body to that extent when we are taking actions here. And the department needs to fully understand that. And their role is in the statute to administratively support this commission. So I would suggest the folks at the commission or at the department, you need to start understanding better how this process is supposed to work, because yesterday was an absolute, it was ridiculous. It was a total waste of time. It should never have happened. And I will leave it with this. You'll remember the old Reagan mantra about the Soviets to trust but verify, verify, verify. Well, trust went out the window yesterday, as far as I'm concerned. It's going to be verify, verify, verify. And nothing like this better ever come, at least before my committee in the future, and shouldn't come before this commission. So folks, wake up.
Commissioner Carter, you and Director Abrazinski has been in this a long time, and I've been with you a lot. Me and you and Director Abrazinski will talk. I got full confidence in you and him to work through this. Clearly there was a bump. Hopefully he just wasn't messing with you yesterday before he left, but he's not here today. Let's work through that, me, you and him. And figure out what's going on. But I appreciate your comments too, and we'll leave it at that. So thank you. Mr. Baumgartner.
Yes, sir. We did not have as much fun as air quality did. Groundwater and waste management committee meeting went fairly smoothly, we think. Adam did a great job filling in for Michael's Director Scott yesterday. We had one action item, which is coming before this commission soon, proposed readoption and schedule of deadlines for the O2S rule, which is a dry cleaning, an administering rule for dry cleaning solvent cleanup. We did have one information item too related to the solid waste landfill PFAS data. It was to give some overview on how to get into those databases. Once we kind of got into it, and I think some of the committee members looked at that, we requested that DWM actually consolidate that data a little bit better for us so we can look as a committee, see some trends, get a better sense of what the data means, and help inform us in the future on future decisions that this committee may make. And also, we did request that we continue to have these information items that come forth to make sure that the committee is very well informed on issues relating to this committee's purview. So other than that, only personal comment is would love to make sure we continue our 2-week posting of materials for committees and for the commission. I think I got a little lax this past time, maybe some good reason, don't know, but love to see that continue. Thank you.
And I appreciate that comment. I haven't mentioned it, but me and Director Rogers, we're working offline on that. I know everything has been pretty good to have 2 weekends for this commission, look at things that didn't happen this time, but it's not going to be perfect every time. So we'll work together to figure that out. Commissioner Bailey.
I just want to thank the staff for all they do with respect to everything, but the Hurricane Helene efforts in Western North Carolina, I don't get much information on it because I live on the eastern side of the state and we have different kinds of news like about PFAS. But when I hear the reports, it's incredible to me how far reaching this is and how many different parts of the state agencies are affected by what needs to be done to get them back to, I don't even know when they'll be back to normal. And I appreciate Commissioner Yarborough's comments about what he sees since he's in the far western part of the state and is right there. I don't want to go there and rubberneck and look around and drive just to look at some damage. So that's not something I've done. But anyway, it's so far reaching, and most people in North Carolina and the United States don't even realize just how much is going on over there today, and it will be that way for a long time. So thank all of you for everything you've done.
Very good. Thank you. Council's report. Nothing today? Okay, very good. Looking forward, I think we've talked about this before. We've come through a major hurricane, as Commissioner Bailey said. At the same time, around the same time, we had an election, got a new administration, new governor, new Speaker of the House, you know, our third secretary probably be confirmed by the time we meet again. But a lot of newness happened in the last couple of meetings, and I think we've done good to plow through the transition. But for the sake of all the members, we're going to pick up speed now. I think the whole system will move back into a speed in May that I can see the agenda already forming up. So everybody needs to get their, not that we weren't before, but we'll have probably a full EMC agenda next time. And I expect that'll be the same way in July and September. So that's kind of where we're going on a number of fronts. So I appreciate everybody's time and efforts here. As I said earlier, the hearing officers and the different things we're going to be doing now that rules readoption's moving through, it's going to, again, once again, kind of strain everybody here to be hearing officers, but I appreciate what you're doing there too. And I appreciate everybody's input on all these committees and to the full EMC. So with that, hearing nothing else for the overall good, we adjourn. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
remissions, we'll need to check a quorum. We have one conflict of interest maybe in that, so we may have to get another member. So somebody asked if we need it. And that will start at, I can't even see what time it is.
Just give it 10 minutes.
You want to say 12:30? We got lunch out there.
I think if we've got someone coming to present, were they told to be? There's somebody coming to present, so do they know to be here?
Usually it's a 15-minute. Is Lois there?